Good morning, everyone. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. I hope you guys are having a good one. Don't mess up, don't mess up, don't mess up. Don't mess up, don't mess up, don't mess up, don't mess up. All right. I hope you guys are having a good one so far. This mic is finicky. So yeah, I have to talk to it gently and very lovingly, kind of like I would talk to Annalena Baerbock. I know you're crazy, but it's okay. It's okay. Now, I hope you guys are doing all right this morning. As I always tell you, you could be anywhere. I'm glad that you are here. And we have a damn good show for you today. A full show, but a damn good one. I shouldn't say but, I should say and a damn good one, but implies something that's coming on the other end of it as being different. So a few things that are taking place. Russia seems to be in the midst of a retaliation. In one case, they hit SBU headquarters that they are saying was responsible. Well, I'm hearing two different things. One, I'm seeing headquarters. The other one, I'm seeing a car that had SBU members in it, basically SBU monkeys and the British handler along with it. So I guess we're going to get more clarification on that as that unfolds. Also, there are apparently multiple attacks taking place all across Ukraine, including what DD Geopolitics, Sarah Bill's outlet, she's fantastic, is calling a Kim Jong missile hit. In Nikolaevka, I believe it's called. So it still feels insufficient. I don't know. And not just feels insufficient. The more I thought about it, the more they're forced to respond. And I get that, yeah, we're pursuing our course. We're not changing our strategy. All that's true. But at the nub of it, NATO, US, UK, I don't care what Trump says, and I want to get to that in a moment, has hit the Russia's nuclear deterrent and has done so brazenly with an operation taking place inside the country. Now, no, even Ukraine at this point admits it was 12, not 40. I don't know who these goofballs are that was repeating 40 over and over and over again. Oh my God, 40% of the Russian military, 40 bombers. Even Ukraine at this point admits it was 12. I don't even know if it was that many, to be frankly honest with you. I still go with this notion of about 8 or 9, and it may even be less than that. We will see as more information comes out for that. But beyond that point, you're talking about a sophisticated military operation that took place over 18 months. And the CIA, who's ensconced in Ukraine, supposedly knew nothing about it. I don't buy the premise. I don't buy the premise. The point that I'm getting at is a NATO operation that directly went after your nuclear deterrent, going after planes that deal with, for one, analyzing whether or not missiles are coming in, but also your ability to deliver strategic warheads, something that would matter greatly if you ended up in a war with NATO itself. Their plans was to take down far more than what they ended up taking down, which is kind of my point. If you don't respond, what does it mean? Doesn't the same logic hold true for either putting troops in Ukraine or, for that matter, firing a Taurus missile into Russia? What's the difference? From my point of view, those things are effectively the same. And if the argument is, well, we're skating a line because we don't want to escalate or start a war with NATO, then you should just accept Donald Trump's peace deal. Because the fact of the matter is that can always be used as a trigger point to get you to back down, which I don't believe they are. I strongly suspect that if you're looking at the attacks that are taking place over the course of what, I guess last night, I mean, Jesus Christ, there were several. Shoviska, Sumy region, and there was another one in Supernova. There are about 8 or 9 different strikes, with the biggest one, or one of the biggest ones, probably taking place in Odessa. But the one in Sumy that took place, you can imagine if you're killing foreign mercenaries, or let's say British handlers, and you're going directly after the people who apparently did the bombings of that train. The train bombing was not a military target. They waited for that train to get over the bomb when they set that bomb off in order to kill those people. And while we're talking about this, I want to hit that too. There are people who call themselves analysts, and I am going to use the term very loosely because of the analysis that they're effectively giving, that has either come up with this weird assessment that, well, Trump said he didn't know, so Trump didn't know. Okay, fair enough. I guess Joe Biden had nothing to do with blowing up Nordstream. I guess Donald Trump was talking to Xi Jinping the entire time that the trade war was taking place. I guess your eggs at the grocery store have gone down in regards to value, meaning Trump lies as easily as he breathes. So why would you believe a habitual liar when a habitual liar implies that I didn't know anything about it? Why would you believe the US? I didn't know anything about it. And yet they immediately take that and run with it as if, man, Donald Trump didn't know anything about it. That's amazing. That is amazing. That is amazing. I don't know what these people are thinking. I don't even know why they're coming up with this particular bit of analysis with a little bit of forethought into all of the incentives that are built into it. It is easy to come away with the assessment that the US obviously knew about it, and not just knew about it, was involved. Whether it was MI6 and the US, whether it was the US working with you, I don't care which one you want to put into it. I'm putting out that this was a NATO operation that the US was intimately involved in. A few points. One, you don't need to notify the US if the US was intimately involved. So for the questions of, hey, did you guys know anything about it? Were you notified? Nope, we weren't notified at all. No, because you were already involved. You don't need to notify me of something that I'm already involved in. On the other front, every incentive in the world, and again, considering Donald Trump is a habitual liar, goes with the idea that if he's asked, he will lie. Plausible deniability is a real thing. I don't believe for a moment, though, that Russia believes the plausible deniability. I'm pretty sure they know full well that the US was intimately involved in the attacks. It's only US media that seems bewildered by it, or for that matter, independent analysts who are floating around on social media who seems to be bewildered by the whole thing. Donald Trump lies as easily as he breathes. Would a habitual liar lie? Yes, a habitual liar will lie. That's why they call habitual liars. Donald Trump has a tweet for everything, right? Any random thing that takes place around the world. Oh my God, China has, betrayed me and has broken the trade deal. China didn't break a trade deal. This was nonsense that Trump made up. But again, habitual liars lie. The point that I'm making here is there's no tweet for this. Isn't that weird? I mean, think of what we're saying for the moment. A peace negotiation that the US effectively ordered its minion, Zelensky, to go to, and where Zelensky is effectively dancing for the camera to make it look as if, hey, really, I'm involved in negotiations. Okay, that peace negotiation, a day before it was taking place, they carried out this particular attack, widespread, in addition to the terrorist attack on a train where they killed 12 people. All right. Last week, when Russia responded to the 1,400 missiles or drones that Ukraine threw at Russia, Trump comes out and says, Putin is crazy. And not just Putin is crazy for what? Killing 13 people out of 1,000 strikes or some insane number of strikes, hundreds of strikes across all of Ukraine. Zelensky and his band of terrorists killed one less in one terrorist attack. There's no tweet for that. Isn't that weird? Isn't that strange? There's no tweet for that. A day before the negotiations take place, and this massive attack gets carried out, it's reported everywhere. Hell, even the name, Spider's Web. There's no tweet for that. Now, if Donald Trump was indeed looking for some kind of peaceful negotiation, and he honestly believed that Ukraine was involved in a negotiation that, again, he himself forced and pushed Zelensky to go to, and they do this, don't you think it would be somewhat of a betrayal if indeed Trump was incompetent enough to believe that the negotiation process was legit, or that Trump was incompetent enough to believe that, okay, these people are supposed to be on the level, I'm the one who pushed them to do it, and now he has done this, which effectively destroys any notion of real negotiations. And yet, there's no tweet for that. That's very strange. There's no Truth Social post about that. There's no calling Zelensky crazy, and Zelensky is a lunatic, and oh my God, I don't know what happened to Zelensky. None of that is there. So Trump gets chapter and verse on anything that Russia does. And despite the media being all over the place talking about this and it being everywhere, Trump, for the first time in his life, is quiet. That's not strange. That's not weird. That's not a bit bizarre, especially considering if reality is as it's presented on the surface. You would think he may have some feelings about effectively killing a peace negotiation as an adjunct to that point. You don't think that Zelensky and the Europeans, who are terrified that Donald Trump is going to take his ball and go home and just walk, leave them holding the ball, a ball that they can no longer hold and that they can't necessarily use on their own, that if you did something like this without telling the US, that the US may feel some kind of way about that, and then may incentivize Trump to walk faster, especially since the theory of him walking has everything to do with this idea that these are horrible people, they can't come to negotiations, so I'm leaving. What you've just done was effectively kill your fake negotiations. And if indeed Trump believed these negotiations were real, and if indeed Zelensky and the Europeans believed that what they were going to do was going to alienate Trump, would they actually do it? My point is, if they weren't alienating Trump because the White House was already in on it. The CIA, all of these spooks, all of these people were already in on it. So they didn't have to worry about, hey, is the president going to get pissed off and walk? Because the president was already there. He was already there. That's why there are no tweets. That's why they didn't worry about doing it. That's why nobody was freaked out with them doing it, because the president was already there. They were on the same page. It's that simple. The CIA is all throughout Ukraine. It's been there for decades. Even the New York Times even goes so far as to say they were rebuilt. The intelligence services of Ukraine was rebuilt in the image of the CIA. And so this organization, spy network, band of criminals, that's all throughout Ukraine, we are supposed to believe that even if they weren't told, which I don't believe for a heartbeat, that it took 18 months to plan, but the CIA got no wind of it. Worst intelligence agency ever, if that's true. That is the worst intelligence agency in the history of agencies, if indeed it is true, because that's what they're asking you to believe, that an 18-month plan with the CIA all throughout Ukraine, all throughout their intelligence and everything else, that at no point did they get back to the US. They're asking you to believe a lot. And yet many of the people in social media seem to have drunk the Kool-Aid and seems to believe it. Trump is not a mediator. I need to drill that home. For whatever reason, some people on social media who call themselves analysts actually believe that he is a mediator. Trump is not a mediator. He is a belligerent to the conflict. He is giving money, weapons, intelligence to one of the sides. The US was an instigator and is the main proponent in this war continuing. How are they acting as if Trump is a mediator? So much so that various goofballs were like, Trump needs to call Putin immediately. Why? Why? And tell him what? Tell him what? He doesn't need to call him. He doesn't need to tell him anything because Russia knows that Trump is already in on it. Trump knows that Russia knows that Trump is already in on it. There's nothing that needs to take place between these two sides in regards to the conversation. Yeah, Trump could call him and just BS. Okay, fair enough. If you want to waste your time doing that. But all things being equal, these people who are screaming that Trump is somehow an infant. I don't quite get this. I honest to God, don't quite get this. Trump wants Russia to accept his ridiculous, ludicrous peace plan. Trump said he's going to get a deal. Trump has been pushing a nonsense proposal because he knows nothing about the region. He knows nothing about Russia. He probably doesn't even grasp the reason that the war has taken place. Somebody tells him, hey, Go push this to Putin. He'll accept it. And Trump goes, and then he's shocked when Putin doesn't accept his nonsense, ridiculous plan. Oh my God, Putin didn't accept my plan. I want him to accept my plan. I need him to accept my plan. And so he goes with black ops in order to escalate this idea of escalating to de-escalate. I know you've heard this in relation to Donald Trump before, but this idea of working behind the scenes to escalate in order to try to incentivize Russia to accept his goofball, nonsense, completely ludicrous and absurd proposal, something that they're not going to do, but he's not bright enough to entirely realize it. And so that is what he tries to do. Under that model of thought, by the way, you want them to know that you did it. You want them to know that you did it. You want them to know that, hey, we're pushing behind the scenes. We're escalating behind the scenes. Yeah, I'm going to keep the fig leaf that I'm pretending. So various people on social media and the goofballs in the media is going to run with this idea that Donald Trump is trying to mediate, get an agreement. Donald Trump is a mediator. Donald Trump is not a principal of the conflict. He's a mediator. But your opposition, your enemy, the one who you've been killing, and you've just helped kill 12 civilians, they are not unaware. They're not unaware. They're just not. Also, I want to take apart this idea of this infantilism of Trump. They're acting as if, oh my God, Trump doesn't know how to read. Trump is not read in. Trump doesn't read stuff. Tulsi Gabbard hasn't gotten this pop-up cartoon book yet. And because she hasn't gotten this pop-up cartoon national security book yet, Trump is blissfully unaware of what is taking place. He is completely in the dark. He is chapter and verse when Russia does something. But when it's the other way around, he's being filtered information. The information is not getting to him. The information is being hidden below somewhere with this deep state of neocons that is preventing Donald Trump from getting the information. Just stop. I get that Trump may have the intelligence of a zygote, but he's a grown-ass man. And as a grown-ass man, he made the choice of who he was going to have around him, people of policy. And so if you're bringing in somebody like Kellogg or Rubio or whatever that other guy who was a Zionist, an Israeli spy, he chose these people. They weren't imposed upon him. He chose these people. These neocons that are around him are the neocons that he chose. People of policy. And if indeed people of policy and you know nothing about the world, then the people who are going to explain it to you are the people who you chose. So stop with this infantilism nonsense. He's a grown-ass man. He's responsible for the people who he put around him and the choices that he makes in that office, especially as president of the United States. And last point, Trump's behavior in this is no different than it is in any other situation. If you're looking at the Gaza thing, hey, I'm going to get a deal for Gaza. And then the moment that his side, because again, the U.S. is a principal in that, we're paying 80% of that, if not more. The moment that his side bucks the deal, he blames the opposition. Same thing with Iran, right? Where you can't come to terms in regards to what you want to do, so you keep escalating, you keep throwing all this stuff around. I'm saying he's doing the same thing with us. He's not a mediator. He's not a third-party viewer viewing from the rafters. He is a principal belligerent in the conflict who is the instigator for the conflict and the proponent to keep the conflict going. So this notion that he knows nothing about it, again, I find it to be nonsense. He's doing what he has done. Ukraine does something, I give it a pass. Russia does something, oh my God, Putin is crazy. It's consistent. I don't understand all of these people who, for whatever particular reason, A, wants to give them a pass, B, wants to live on hopium and wishful thinking as opposed to actual analysis of what is taking place in real world terms. They try to continuously act as if he's not part of this, that he's too stupid to be aware. And yeah, I think he's dumb as a box of rocks, but no, I don't buy the premise that he has nothing to do with this. I think he is intimately involved, which for all of the reasons that I just listed. My guest is here though. Damn it, Brian, I'm running behind. I'm sorry, man.
No, it's okay.
You doing all right?
Yes.
I'm so sorry. I lost track of time. Brian Berletic, he is Bangkok-based geopolitical researcher, writer, and host of the New Atlas, host and creator of the New Atlas, a fantastic media outlet. How you doing, man? You doing all right this morning or this evening?
I'm doing well. Yes, it's evening time here for me, and thank you for having me on.
No, thank you for joining me. I'm slightly annoyed with people for keep putting this out. Like, people are considered to be analysts who are saying stuff like, "Oh my God, Donald Trump wasn't made aware of this. Oh my God, nobody told Donald Trump that this was going to happen. Oh my God, Ukraine did this on their own." It makes no sense to me. Oh, where do you think this is coming from? Is it just in their minds, Donald Trump is incompetent, and so he is just left in the dark? I don't understand how they're coming to this conclusion that Donald Trump is out of the loop on something where he seems to be clearly in the loop on. As I pointed out, there are no tweets. They didn't take any issue doing that with the idea of getting a rebuke from Trump on this. What are your thoughts on this?
I think it's rationalization. I think it's denial. A lot of these people went way out on a limb to support President Trump when he was campaigning. A lot of them had very selective hearing. If you listen to what he was actually saying, even before he got elected, he was telling you he's going to continue absolutely everything. He was going to walk hand in hand with the deep state into perpetual war, just like everyone before him, just like he did the first 4 years he was in office. Yep. And then even if he was smart enough not to say that while campaigning, and if you just weren't careful enough to listen and hear that, just look at his first 4 years in office. And now people have made all kinds of excuses as to why he oversaw continuity of agenda. That is what he did. That is what he's doing now. And I don't even really think it matters whether he knows or doesn't know what's going on. He's in charge of nothing. He makes no decisions. He thinks Spain is the S in BRICS. So what does this guy know about anything? And people are trying to convince me that he's playing interdimensional backgammon against the deep state, but that he doesn't even understand the absolute most elementary aspects of this high stakes U.S. proxy war in Ukraine. How does he not know this? He doesn't read the New York Times. And I heard, actually, I listened to your excellent show the other day with Mark Sloboda and Danny Haifang. Yeah. Excellent guest, great conversation. And I heard you talking about this and people claiming that President Trump doesn't read. He needs pictures, he needs diagrams. And I'm kind of I like diagrams, I like pictures, but I also read. And I'm also capable, because I have a lot of people sending me information, right? And I'm capable of looking at this information and saying, is this good? Is this good information? Is this good advice? And I'm able to decide that for myself. And if President Trump is incapable of deciding whether or not he's getting good information, and then to fix this problem, who are these people that are giving him information? People he handpicked. People he publicly supports and put into those positions. Yes. So there's no excuse. There's no excuse. He, like every politician before him, told you what you wanted to hear, but not even really. And now he's doing the exact opposite. What he told you he was going to stop, he is actually doing. He is working with all of these, if you want to call it the deep state, all of these corporations, all of these banks, these equity firms, BlackRock, Boeing, Raytheon, Lockheed, OpenAI, Google, all of them, absolutely all of them. He's working with all of them, and he's continuing absolutely everything that was handed to him by the Biden administration, which did the exact same thing. None of these people are making decisions. They're salesmen, and that's what Trump was his whole life. He's a salesman. That's what he's doing now. He's taking these agendas that they tell him he's going to sell to the American people, and that's what he does. He sells it. Doesn't really even need to know the details. And that's why it seems like he doesn't, because he doesn't know them. He doesn't need to know them.
I want to put a hashtag around interdimensional backgammon. That is the funniest thing I've heard today. That is hilarious. What do you think is going on with this? I mean, Russia's been very silent. Medvedev has given a comment out. From my point of view, they have to respond. I mean, for all intents and purposes, NATO went after their nuclear, let's say, strategic deterrent. And I don't know what that looks like if they don't respond. And I guess on some level, they have started hitting various targets. I mean, the latest one was apparently the military group in Sumy that they're saying was responsible for the train blast. But what do they expect Russia to do with this? Certainly, every incentive in the world is going to be to escalate.
Well, I was listening to Mark Sloboda yesterday, and I agree with just about everything that he was saying. And we can only see the amount of information that is available publicly. If you're in the Kremlin, you can see absolutely everything. That is not just what's on your plate regarding Ukraine and NATO and Western Europe and Eastern Europe, but also Central Asia, Asia Pacific, Africa, the Middle East, all of these areas that Russia is involved in, that Russia is fighting a multi-front war against the US. The US is trying to encircle and contain Russia, Iran, China. All three of these countries are allies. There are so many factors that they have to take into effect. And I heard you referencing chess, and I know that you like playing chess. I'm not really good at it, but I do like playing it. I don't know much about it except the basic rules. But do you know that feeling you get when someone unexpectedly takes one of your high value pieces? And you get emotional and you want to hit them right back. But sometimes you hit them right back. You just opened yourself up to another. Sometimes they laid a trap for you, knowing that was an easy act of revenge you could get to try to even the odds, and you've fallen into their trap. So what Russia isn't looking at the big picture in terms of the Ukraine conflict and then years in advance, all of the things that will happen in the next couple of years regarding Ukraine. They're looking at everything that's going to happen around the entire planet Earth, where the US is involved absolutely everywhere. Russia, Iran, and China are trying to defend absolutely everywhere. They're trying to build up an alternative order that displaces US hegemony, and the US is trying to completely burn it all to the ground. So this is what they're thinking when they see something like this happen. And no, I'm not really sure. I think the details are still not totally out there, but I was just looking at the most recent tallies I could find. Obviously the Ukrainian government says they hit and destroyed 41.
Well, actually, aircraft. They came back and said 12. They admitted 12.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yes. Because I was going to say that then there was this Ukrainian Center for Disinformation. I think I'm on one of their lists just for doing analysis. And they said something like 13. The New York Times, their most recent article just a couple hours ago, says they could only confirm 4 Tupolev Tu-95 strategic bombers. And that was the video that everyone saw. And if they had more videos, they would be showing all of the videos. If they had satellite pictures, they would be showing all of it. I'm going to wait and give them a little bit more time. But the way it looks right now, and the New York Times also said US officials said 6 Tu-95s and 1 A-50. That is a airborne early warning and control plane, which they exist in small numbers. They are of high value, but it is what it is. Some people will say, how come, and I'm one of them, I said to myself, 2 years ago, it was obvious that these drones were very dangerous and that Ukrainians could infiltrate into Russia, because Ukrainians and Russians, Ukrainians can pretend all they want that they're a completely separate race from the Slavs. They are Russians. They are Russians, and they blend in very well. And as Mark Sloboda said yesterday, there's millions of Ukrainians who live in Russia. They can infiltrate in, and they can either bring these drones in with them, smuggle them in, or they can build them over time. They could create them, and they could be so far into Russian territory, far away from any drone that could take off from Ukraine and hit a target in Russia. And they could carry out these types of attacks. It was obvious. Now, the scale of this attack, they're talking, they had multiple trucks. I believe they wanted to hit maybe up to 40 or 50. Oh,
of course bombers, they did.
Of course. And that was the scale of the attack. But the fact that it only hit this many instead of many, many more is probably because Russia has been taking measures to protect their assets against. So although I still agree with Mark Sloboda about the lack of hardened shelters, it's not just this war with Ukraine. Russia's worried about a wider war with the rest of NATO, other proxies the U.S. is preparing. China also, they all have to start thinking about this you cannot have these assets unless you're not worried about losing them and you feel confident you can replace them or adapt and overcome to losing them. You need to put them inside something.
Yeah.
Put them inside. Make them work to destroy it.
Yeah. I think we're in a new norm. I think that's what it is. I mean, well, two thoughts. One, I agree with Sloboda up to a point. I agree that you shouldn't overreact. I do agree with that. I agree that you shouldn't change your battle plan. Again, I agree with that. If your battle plan is winning, then that's the thing that matters. And you can look at what's happening on the battlefield. They've just taken another village in Sumi. The mayor in Sumi is effectively called for evacuations because there are no defensive fortifications in the area. Meaning, regardless of this hysteria that's taking place around this, the quiet, consistent thing that's on the battlefield is the thing that is going to put the dagger in Ukraine's lungs. So, agreed. But man, there should be consequences. That's just the way I think. I'm sorry, that's the way I think. And I agree with you with the openness thing too, right? Like, it's not that I'm calling for something, a change in strategy. It's not that. It's more so that I guess I'm trying to make this point that you are competing against all of NATO. You are, at this point, competing in this kind of world contest where they're using Ukraine as a way of hitting you while simultaneously saying we don't have anything to do with it. And doing it in a way where you can't create a justification to hit them back. That just seems to get worse and worse and worse. And like, there needs to be consequences for that. And I don't, whatever those are, I'm not, there are some people who are out there saying that this is invoking the nuclear doctrine. I think those people are insane. But I'm not even going to name names. I think those people are insane with that. But I do think there should be consequences. And to be fair, the attacks that they're taking place now, I suppose are consequences. But I guess my first thought is, why weren't you doing that at first? Meaning that stuff should have already been targets. That stuff should have already been targets. The second point, from my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong on this, based on some kind of treaty, I think it was like the New START Treaty or something like that, those planes are always supposed to be out in the open where satellites can always keep coverage of what those planes are doing, almost just as an agreement between the United States and Russia. But maybe I'm wrong on this.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I've heard people say that. I've tried to confirm that, and so far I haven't been able to.
Yeah,
so I'm kind of 50-50 on that until I get more information. The thing is, I'm trying to think of what Russia could do, because this is the problem the U.S. has created for Russia, Iran, and China. None of these nations want an all-out war with the U.S. or even these proxy wars. They don't want any war at all. I think they have grasped the reality that they're not getting out of this. They're not negotiating. There's nobody to negotiate with. They have a plan and they're putting it together. The negotiations are part of the plan to impose these conditions and tie their hands even further. That's the whole point of it. And they have to know this because they've written public policy papers. If they're not, if Russia, Iran, China, if their leadership that don't have analysts capable of reading Western policy papers and just like that's the blueprint that they're obviously working from, then I don't know what to say.
Yeah. I think they do read. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm hoping that they do. And the thing that I would say is that, one, Russia is not all powerful. And so there are serious limits to what they can do. The part of this war on Russia is to overextend it. They want to provoke Russia into committing to something that will overextend them further and possibly create an opportunity, maybe not in Ukraine, but maybe somewhere else along the periphery. We already watched this play out in Syria. The fact that they couldn't hold Syria and also maintain their focus on Ukraine illustrates that there are serious limits. They couldn't be in both places at once, and so they had to give up on Syria. And I know people are saying, that was Russia's approach to Syria, and look at what happened to Syria. But again, you have to look at this as not two different chess games. This is all one chess game that is being played. They gave up Syria because they see the bigger picture and they have a bigger strategy. And they were willing to, just like in chess, you sacrifice pieces. That was a necessary sacrifice. It wasn't something they did, what they weren't flippant about it. They did everything they could possibly
Mhm.
It's just the realities of the limits that they have. There's limits to what China can do. There are serious limits to what Iran can do. And they're taking all of that into consideration and not going to come out and say that. And they're going to tell the Russian public, yes, we found the unit that was involved in that and we bombed them. If they knew where these units were ahead of time, of course, they would have already bombed them. Yeah. Maybe they did trace it back and find a location they weren't aware of before. And that's why they struck it, bombed it, or struck it with a missile or a rocket. But the thing is, I think their options are very limited unless they want to escalate to war with the rest of NATO. The U.S. you already see the U.S. positioning Europe, and this is what we always talk about together, sending the next proxy into the wood chipper. So they're almost done with Ukraine, put the last few twigs in, and now they're getting a big bundle of Europeans getting ready to shove them in, and that's what they're getting ready to do. And this is why Russia has to conserve its military power, build it up very carefully, conserve it. They cannot waste it. They cannot waste it. Trying to get, from their point of view, revenge will be victory, and that is the way China is thinking. And this is all very long term. And they are willing to make sacrifices in the short term, however uncomfortable that makes us feel. It's something they are willing to do because they can see the big picture. Hopefully, that's the reason they're doing it. I've heard people say, maybe President Putin is trying to, and there are people out there like this. This is why it's a plausible theory that I know people who understand the West is dangerous, but they still want to fit in with the West. Which is insane. And I'm just hoping that is not what's going on in the Kremlin, because that would be catastrophic. They will lose this conflict if that is the case. I've seen that here in Asia. I've seen countries in Asia where that led to their downfall. Bangladesh, the government there was being undermined and overthrown by the U.S. over years, and she did not want to face that reality, and she wanted to fit in and be accepted by the West. And all the while, the West took advantage of that, undermining her. And then one day she found herself on a helicopter. I think she fled to India. This is what happened. I hope it's not that one. That would be very unpleasant.
Especially not after Minsk 1 and 2, not after him begging for them to come to terms, not after knowing that, whether it's 100,000 Russians, that they were directly responsible for those deaths. I hope that's not it. I hope that's not it.
I don't think that it is, but people should keep an open mind to all options until you can completely rule them out.
And by the way, you're right about China too. These are pressure points. Taiwan is a huge pressure point. I mean, in fact, Hegseth in that deranged lunatic speech that he gave in Singapore made the point of saying, yeah, we need effectively our Western neighbors to take over in Europe so we can pivot to Asia and we can fight and militarily defeat China in a war over Taiwan. And it's like, what? That is so outrageous. Look, it's one thing to write it in a policy paper. It's another thing for the Department of Defense, the head of the Department of Defense, to get out and say openly that we are prepared to fight a war over Taiwan, an area that even by our own communiques is considered to be part of China. That is astonishing. That is astonishing.
And his speech during this conference in Singapore, this is the bookend to his directive that he laid out February 12th that I always go to, where he told Europe, you need to pick up the slack here. You need to draw Russia in and keep them occupied in Ukraine. And we're going to pivot to Asia. And so now he's in Singapore. This is still the plan. Remember, I kept saying, this is the only plan that they have. This is the plan. Everything else, all of this other rhetoric about negotiations and Trump's fighting the deep state and this and that and the other thing. And maybe Trump's just getting bad advice. No, it's all to distract you and buy time so that they can implement this plan. It's not a coincidence that Secretary Hegseth is saying the same thing now that he was saying back in February, because that is the plan. This is what they're implementing. And I'm almost certain that Russia, Iran, and China understand this. Not just analysts, but people in the West in general, if they ever want their own interests served by the people taking all of their tax dollars and managing all of their resources, if they ever want their interests served by these people, they need to start. First, they have to stop falling for this act, this left-right act. Oh, those guys are the bad guys. We're the good guys. They're all bad guys. They're all kicking the can down the road. They're getting you to buy into at least half of their agenda. Mm-hmm. And notice, like, how is President Trump's policy towards China distinguishable from President Biden's? It's indistinguishable.
Or Obama's.
Yes, or Obama's, and it goes all the way back to Bush Jr. And what they did was they built steps, like a staircase for the next president. It doesn't matter, Republican or Democrat. They can pose as political enemies, ideological opposites. They're building the stairs for the next person to take over and continue absolutely all of this. President Biden built the U.S. military that Secretary Hegseth is threatening China with right now. All of these missiles, these missile forces, these forces they'll use to interdict Chinese maritime shipping, that was all built by Biden and then handed off to Trump. And now Secretary Hegseth is threatening not just China, but everyone here in the Asia Pacific region. He's right. If the U.S. provokes a war with China over Taiwan, it's going to destroy everything for everybody here in Asia Pacific and probably everywhere else all around the globe. And so people have to understand the U.S. is on literally the other side of the planet provoking this while pointing the finger at China and saying, look at what China is doing. And it's outrageous. But that is how they've positioned themselves. And this is what they have used, the power that they've accumulated over decades to do. It's to force countries like Russia, Iran, China into these corners where the U.S. can constantly provoke and escalate. And these countries really don't have an option to retaliate like many people want to see them do, because it'll escalate into all-out war, which they're trying to avoid. They also are trying to time out the clock, kick the can down the road with the status quo, build up their power and surpass the United States to a point where no matter what the U.S. says or does, they will not be able to coerce these countries ever again.
But see, that's the rub. At a certain point, there is no, how can I say this? At the point where both of us have a gun, both of us are going to die. Like this ability to get this dominant advantage. At a certain level, everybody dies. Like there's no way around it. Like the moment that both of us have nukes, you can't win it and I can't win it. We just all die. Which is why this doesn't really make sense to me. Like, it's one thing to say, okay, well, we're going to feed Europe to Russia. Okay. And I remember the last conversation we had, you were like, well, they don't believe that Russia will be able to create an argument where they can pull America into basically, well, they're not going to hit America because technically it's a war between Europe and Russia. I think the only catch with that is NATO. If the U.S. comes to the assistance of NATO, at that point, the U.S. is directly involved in the conflict. China is different, though. I mean, it's the U.S. that is directly provoking with China. It's not Hegseth saying our proxies are going to fight a war with you. Hegseth is saying we, us, the U.S., will fight a war and militarily defeat China, which even with our own war games is fanciful. Like, it just seems outrageous. Like, it's not even a war that you can win. You are going to ultimately end up in a nuclear war because that's the only thing you're really going to have to even get close. Like, they will knock our missile carriers or our ships out of the water before it even gets close. What do you think is going on in their minds with this? I mean, do they really think they can win a nuclear war? Because otherwise, I don't see how this is beneficial to anybody, let alone the U.S.
I think they look at success that they've had in the past, say the Soviet Union and its collapse. In their mind, that is the ideal scenario for the Russian Federation, Iran, and China. They would like to have that, precipitate that for all three nations, and they're working on it. They're working on it. They're creating the conditions. They're preparing the battlefield to do that. They really don't want to fight a direct war. I would say right now the United States is preparing more for a global maritime blockade, enforcing it worldwide, rather than actually fighting China right off their coast. Because again, that would be catastrophic. Yeah. I think they feel if they could provoke China into some kind of conflict and even lose ships, U.S. ships, and have U.S. sailors die in large numbers, they can not only convince the American public, but the European public to get on board with sweeping sanctions, cut China off completely. We know that will be catastrophic for Western economies, but because people will be, in this mindset that the U.S. deliberately created, I think they feel like maybe they could work with that. Remember the war on terror, and remember right after 9/11, the atmosphere. I mean, we lived through that. We saw that. We saw how people completely lost their mind, lost their ability to reason. Some people still to this day, because of that, have never rejoined us here in reality. And they see President Trump shaking hands with Al-Qaeda in Syria, the head of Al-Qaeda in Syria, who just a few months ago had a $10 million bounty on his head by the U.S. And the organization that he leads is still literally listed by the U.S. government as a foreign terrorist organization. This is how they are able to manipulate. And this is one of the most dangerous weapons I would say the U.S. has, not necessarily its military power. That is waning. The power they have to persuade people, politically capture a nation, erode a nation's sovereignty, its source of strength and unity. This is its super weapon. This is what it's been using successfully all around the world. They're still doing it. They're still here in Asia doing it. They're still here in Thailand doing it. And everyone's asleep because they think President Trump eliminated U.S. aid. He didn't. It's still there. It's under the State Department operating. And the National Endowment for Democracy is still operating. And now they say we're not going to disclose who we're giving money to. That was what was going to happen. I've warned people for years that's what they were doing incrementally, and now they've officially announced it. They're not going to announce it. It's back to the CIA covert regime change, but they're still doing it. And that speech by Secretary Hegseth recently in Singapore, basically threatening China. If you assert your sovereignty under international law over your island province of Taiwan, we will go to war with you. That is what he said to China in front of the entire world and in front of Southeast Asia, all of these nations that were assembled there. That's what he said. And so this is where we're going to go. And I think it's up to the alternative media, and I think it's up to these governments that still have the time and the space to do it. They need to get serious about information space and confronting U.S. political interference, because that is way more dangerous than their military or economic power, which we can all agree is on the decline. Their ability to politically interfere is still extremely powerful. And they feel like that is still a possible way they can reassert U.S. primacy over the globe, over these emerging powers and over this emerging multipolar architecture.
But it seems so outlandish. Like, I'm curious on your take. You live in Bangkok. What was the response in Thailand to the speech? I saw some of the analysis from people who were there in the audience, some of the journalists. And from my understanding, people were just kind of shocked at the speech. Like, so he expects us to increase the amount of money we're spending on our military budget to fight China? Is he out of his mind? That seemed to be the response to people, that this was a MAGA speech, not a speech about, Asia or anything like that. What was the reporting on it in Bangkok? I'm curious about Thailand. How did they take it?
Again, it's divided because the U.S. still exercises tremendous influence here in Thailand. So all of the media that is influenced by the West, which is almost all of it, they're going to sit there and report it as if they're just taking CNN or the BBC and translating it into Thai for local Thai people. Now, there are large numbers of Thai people who understand this, who want to work together with China, who don't see China as an enemy at all. I've watched it because I've been here since 2003, 2004, and I've watched the whole region and Thailand transform. And it wasn't because the U.S. helped develop it. It was despite everything the U.S. did to prevent development. And it was China's rise that helped all of these other nations rise. Everything that Thailand is enjoying right now, from infrastructure, healthcare, cheap cost of living across the entire spectrum, this is because of the rise of China. And the only thing that can threaten that or reverse it is the United States, its interference, any potential conflict or proxy war that it wages in this region. It'll upturn all of that, and it will destroy the way of life people have I think, take for granted, especially if they're consuming Western influenced media. They just think this just happened. And maybe it happened because we're such good friends with the United States, and we're more and more enjoying democracy and Western style culture. But it isn't. It is the exact opposite.
Wow, they believe that. Like I'm always shocked at the Taiwan thing. It's like you can look at what's happening to Ukraine, and they come away with the assessment of we need some of that. It's like, really? Is that what you really need? That's what you need in your life? And the same thing for the Philippines, right? It's like, we're going to put U.S. missiles and we're going to surround China. And Hegseth, that, again, deranged speech where he's like, we're not trying to militarily surround China. Yes, you are. You're literally doing that. We're not trying to instigate a war with China. You literally have U.S. military in Taiwan right now, in a sovereign country. Like, that entire speech was so mendacious that it is breathtaking, only rivaled by maybe Trump. It is shocking to me that those countries look at that and say to themselves, we need some of Ukraine. We need some of that. That's what we need in our lives. This is a great outcome for Ukraine right now. That's what we need. I don't get it.
Well, this is why I constantly warn about political interference and political capture, because this is what it does. It transforms people into highly irrational, highly obedient proxies, extensions of U.S. interests, and they are serving U.S. interests at the complete cost of their own country. The Philippines desperately needs infrastructure, and China was literally in the process of building it. And when Marcos came into office, he halted all of the projects, began physically destroying it, which actually takes more resources to do, physically destroying it, and then transferring public money into weapons to point at China, which is the Philippines' largest trade partner. And the trade that the Philippines does with China cannot be replaced by any combination of U.S., European, alternative trade relationships with nations allied to the United States. It's impossible. So they are doing exactly what Ukraine did. And look at what happened to Ukraine. And what is that a product of? That isn't the product of people rationally looking at all their choices and then choosing to do this. This was years and years of the U.S. interfering, taking over the media, taking over the political system, literally installing client regimes into office in Ukraine, in the Philippines, in Taipei, the local administration there. They're all installed into power by the U.S., and they serve U.S. interests at the expense of everyone that actually live in these places. And that's why Europe is lining up and getting ready to go into the wood chipper of proxy war with Russia, because their governments are politically captured. They're not looking at this and saying, oh, I really think Russia is a threat and this is in our best interest. No, they are politically captured and they're doing what they're told. They personally, the people making these decisions, feel impunity. And they know that all they have to do is hop on a plane and leave. And they could go to the United States, or they could go live it. Well, if Europe goes down, I guess I don't know where they're going to go. Yeah. But I'll especially here in Asia, these people that sell themselves out to the United States, they just leave to Europe. When things go bad, they go to Europe, or they go to the United States. They'll go to Virginia or Washington, or California, and they'll live there for a while until maybe they can mount a comeback. The Philippines were literally colonized by the U.S. Other people don't understand this. The U.S. is talking about China threatening the region. The only country that has been mass murdering, colonizing, invading, and occupying, including until this day, leaving their military forces scattered across the region, that is the United States doing that. So you're absolutely right. The way they could take reality and turn it upside down and still have people completely buy into it. This is why I keep saying that it's the information space. You could have all the tanks and missiles in the world, but if your population won't get into those tanks or fire those missiles in the right direction, then what good did any of them do? You have to start with information space, education, your political system. It needs to be walled off from U.S. interference or all other military power that you're using to protect yourself from the threat of U.S. military force is irrelevant. And how many times has the U.S. overthrown a country with a formidable military, but insufficient defenses against political interference? And they never even saw their information space as a security domain.
Wow. I mean, and you're absolutely right. I mean, Georgia had to learn this the hard way, right? Romania didn't quite get the hint.
Nope.
But yeah, Georgia had to learn this the hard way. They tried to literally overthrow the country. And the Georgian, I think it was Prime Minister, comes out and says, they threatened us. They told us we weren't going to be part of the EU. They effectively was going to use NGOs and all of these other organizations to basically overthrow the government so we can open up a second front against the Russians, which goes to the whole thing of expanding the battlefield, forcing Russia to overly extend itself in regards to the conflict. Same thing with Romania, what they're doing with the Black Sea Fleet thing. So no, you're absolutely right. And you found yourself to be right throughout this. I want to hit two more topics, Iran for a moment, and then I want to bounce to Syria, because your post on Syria is so dead on. You know, many of these countries in Africa believe, especially Sahel states, that the U.S. is effectively paying terrorists, France also, to undermine the country, to try to create a justification for the U.S. or for France to stay in those countries. Effectively, hey, we're here fighting terrorism. Here's money for the terrorists. That type of thing. And you see the situation with Jelani, where Donald Trump, again, the guy, the audience needs to understand this. The man was leader of ISIS, chopping heads himself. Trump shakes the man's hand and says, hey, he's a good-looking guy with a strong past. Yeah, strong past, chopping off heads. Remove sanctions. The moment that he was able to take over Syria, remove the bounty off of his head. And now you have effectively, as you call it, I think you call it a terrorist hub for export. Basically, terrorists for hire to export to other countries, with the hub at that point being Syria. But it looks like it's falling apart, though. It looks, meaning there have been skirmishes. In fact, I have video where various members of his government is fighting other people who are on the ground because it seems like he cozied up too close to either Israel or, for that matter, too close to the United States. And they took issue with that, saying, wait a minute, this is not why we overthrew this country and why we were murdering these Alawites. We thought you were going to be a true believer. Give me your take on that. What do you think is happening there? Do you think this is just to make space for Israel? Meaning they were never going to allow Jelani to maintain power. He's a head chopper. That all things being equal, the thought was create political instability in Syria, allow Israel to further expand into Syria itself with the justification of, hey, this is a hostile neighborhood. The country is unstable, so we need to take more territory. Or do you think something else is going on with us?
Well, they have no intention of allowing Syria to exist as a functioning nation state. That this will never happen, and so they're quite happy with everybody killing each other. What they want to do with Syria is maintain it as destabilized, no integrated air defense, because they want the U.S. and Israel to be able to fly across its airspace with impunity.
Right.
To say go strike Iran, for example. I mean, that was a huge, that Which Path to Persia paper from all the way back in 2009 from the Brookings Institution, they said that was a huge problem. Whose airspace are Israeli planes going to go through? Now that problem has been solved. It will be Syria's airspace at a minimum. They will also use it the same way they were using Idlib, but now they have the whole country essentially. They will transform this into a hub for extremism. President Trump just approved of holding thousands of terrorists, including thousands of Uyghur extremists, we remember the U.S. accusing China of genocide against the Uyghurs. They don't like them just because they've lived there for centuries, side by side with the rest of China. One day, President Xi Jinping just woke up and decided, I don't like the Uyghurs anymore, even though their language is on all of our money. Like if you look at Chinese paper money, the Uyghur language is on it, along with Tibetan language and a whole number of others, because they're quite okay with all these ethnic groups. So the actual problem was the U.S. doing inside China what it had done in Syria, Libya, all of these other countries. They radicalized them with help from Turkey and Saudi Arabia. And then the radicalization turned into violence. The violence spread across Xinjiang in the West. Then it spread across the rest of China, then the rest of Asia. And then they had thousands of these extremists. China was trying to de-radicalize, deprogram them, reintegrate them into Chinese society. Those that they just left and they went to Syria. They came through Southeast Asia and they created all kinds of problems here in Thailand. There was a bombing, killed 20 people right in the center of Bangkok. And then they went to Turkey, and then Turkey and the CIA set them up with weapons and training and sent them into Syria and to join the cause. Yeah, there he is.
Outrageous. Yeah, a good-looking guy, strong pants.
I mean, and just think about Trump supporters twisting themselves up into pretzels, trying to justify all of this. And these are the same people who are like chronic racists and Islamophobes and the Muslims are taking over, and yet and Islam is the problem, and yet there is your president that you voted shaking hands with a literal terrorist. And this was always going to happen. This wasn't some conundrum that President Trump faced and is trying to be pragmatic. The U.S. created these extremists. It wasn't Islam. The U.S. did it together with Saudi Arabia and other countries. They deliberately radicalized them because ordinarily Muslims are not radical. Believe it or not, there's over 1 billion Muslims around the world. If even 1% of them were extremists, they would have the largest army in the world. They would have taken over already. So it's something that people have been manipulated again across media, across information space. They've been convinced that this is a problem and the U.S. is the solution, when the U.S. actually deliberately created this problem specifically to undermine China. They did the same thing in Chechnya to undermine the nascent Russian Federation after the Cold War. They're doing it here in the Deep South in Thailand. They were using race and ethnicity and religion in neighboring Myanmar. That's also here in Southeast Asia. And again, Libya, Syria, all of these countries, they use these radicalized terrorists to undermine and destabilize and overthrow these countries. And I show the 2007 Seymour Hersh article titled "The Redirection" in the New Yorker. And he warned about all of this. And this started under Bush Jr. It continued all throughout 8 years of Obama, 4 years of Trump, 4 years of Biden. And here's President Trump. He is like putting the birthday candles on top of this layered cake. And by shaking hands with these terrorists the U.S. created and used to overthrow all of these countries. And by the way, they did this in Libya with Al-Qaeda's franchise, I guess you could call them, in Libya, called the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group. And then they took all of those terrorists, once they overthrew the government there and completely destroyed everything, they literally took them and brought them to Turkey to then go inside Syria and continue there. So this is what I'm warning people about. Now they've accomplished this in Syria. There's no peace. There's no stability. The U.S. is going to use this to further radicalize these people and then deploy them all across Eurasia, Africa, probably even Europe and the United States. Because remember, inside the minds of a lot of Trump supporters, Islam is the problem. But all these terrorists carrying out deadly attacks like the Manchester, do people remember the Manchester attack in the United Kingdom? That the people that did that were Libyan Islamic Fighting Group fighters. They came from the US, British, French, created, backed, armed, trained terrorists that they used to overthrow the Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi in 2011. This is what they do. And then they bring these terrorists in. They know they're dangerous. They don't detain them. They just let them walk around at a minimum as ticking time bombs, if not help them from A to Z to carry out these attacks, because they know it will divide and distract their own population. This allows them to continue this agenda. It's just like you were saying. They come into Africa saying, we're here to help with the terrorists. They're the ones that are behind the terrorists in the first place. So this is exactly what they're doing back home in the West. So you want to point your finger at someone who's destroying Western civilization, point it at your leaders. Don't point it at some group that is fleeing from their country because your country destroyed it. Point it at your leaders. But that would actually take courage and guts to stand up to your government. It's much easier to point at brown people and say, they're the problem. I'm going to vote for this guy or that guy. He'll solve it. And, it's a lot easier to do that than to actually confront your own government. Look at the truth. They don't. Yeah.
I mean, I'm glad you bring up Libya. Libya is a great example. You have the U.S. effectively backing terrorists and then turn around and say, hey, Gaddafi is fighting these terrorists who we call civilians, and then go after a bombing raid in order to get rid of Gaddafi. Same thing with Syria, right? It's like, oh, they're the Free Syrian Army. These people were terrorists. like
Beginning.
the naming is fantastic. Leave no child behind, or enhanced interrogation, which is really torture. It's like you just change the name and the media just runs with it, right? You have a compliant media that goes with it. If you remember when Hillary Clinton sent that email that said something to the effect of Saudi Arabia is spreading Wahhabism all throughout the region, it didn't stop Hillary Clinton from taking money from that same Saudi Arabia. Or when Jake Sullivan said Al-Qaeda is with us. Okay, is there a different Al-Qaeda that I don't, that I'm unaware of? We were obviously paying these people. Who do we think Obama was paying the billions of dollars to use in Syria? They weren't, angels. Like they weren't these just great upstanding people. That wasn't the way it worked. Hell, even the Mujahideen. Like we use these radicals, whether it's right wingers in Ukraine, whether it's kill squads in South America. There's like a type that's a guy thick neck with a gun or that's willing to use a gun, and we're just like, here's money, go do work.
Yes.
So
Yes.
yeah, it's unfortunate. It really is. I got to get to Iran before I let you go.
Sure.
So Iran is going to reject that nonsense deal that Donald Trump is pushing out. I don't even know what the deal is yet. I do know that for the longest time, Donald Trump wouldn't come down one way or another on what he wanted. Initially, it was the amount of enrichment. Then last person in the room, it became, okay, we need the Libyan model, which even using that phraseology is problematic, but okay. Now we need the Libyan model. Now it's you're supporting terrorists around in the region as he shakes hands with a literal terrorist. Like this like the mendacity is so over the top that it's breathtaking that a man could take that much lying and still function. I think I've agreed with you on this. I've been very cynical about the peace, quote unquote, process. I do give room for what may be in a president's mind, but at the point where there becomes a consistency in what he's doing, then you lose me, right? Because for one, you're not being honest about it. You're effectively saying Iran is trying to get nukes, and this is all about Iranian nukes. Okay, well, even your own intelligence says they're not trying to get nukes. And if they wanted a nuke, they would have one by now. Netanyahu said they were trying to get a nuke, or they would have one 20 years ago. And so they had 5 minutes to get one in that 20 years ago. So if even the way you're talking about it is dishonest, then I'm very dodgy about this entire process. And as you point out, there's an arc of history with many presidents that regardless of whether they were on Democratic side or Republican side, that went after Syria, Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan, et cetera. All of those countries are gone, or at the very least have been destroyed. Iran is the last man standing. So I didn't buy what Trump was selling with this peace process nonsense. At this point, it seems like there's going to be a skirmish, at least. It seems like either Israel is going to do strikes, Israel is going to do strikes with the U.S. pretending as if it knows nothing about it. Hell, the U.S. may even help at this point, saying, well, we did everything we could to get a deal. What do you think is going to happen with this? Because this is not the same Iran as back when Donald Trump was in office the first time around. This is a different animal right now.
That is exactly what they're trying to do. Whether they can do it or not, that's another question. But that has always been the plan. The plan isn't to negotiate some sort of peace with Iran. And just like you said, they've destroyed every single country to the east and west of Iran. And now that they have Iran isolated, suddenly they're interested in peace. Who buys that? I don't buy that for a minute. It doesn't make any sense at all. President Trump, during his first 4 years, did everything in his power to continue facilitating this confrontation with Iran, which, again, is on the other side of the planet. It's none of America's business. If the UN said something about Iran and its nuclear weapons program, and something was decided in the Security Council, then maybe the U.S. might have a case, but not really, because they've already played this game with Iraq and they got caught lying about it. So who believes them this time around? And even if Iran was trying to get nuclear weapons, why shouldn't they? Look at what's happened to everyone else around them. Look at Israel. They have nuclear weapons. They're allowed to have nuclear weapons. So this is obviously a game of divide and conquer. They want to get Iran next, but they don't want to make it look like they provoked this. This is literally what it says in all of these policy papers. There's not one single policy paper genuinely putting the idea forward that we should genuinely negotiate with Iran. When they talk about negotiating with Iran, they say, we negotiate so we look like we're acting in good faith. And then when the deal falls apart, and because we'll make it fall apart, we can point the finger and blame at Iran. It's just like Secretary Hegseth pointing the finger at China and saying, how dare you build your military up and not just let us just invade and occupy your territory. That's what he's like. Deterrence against what? Deterrence against China defending itself from literally a U.S. invasion and occupation. And this is what they're doing to Iran also, and also Russia and everywhere else. This is what they always do. So President Trump never had any intention at all. I don't know if he's in on it or if he actually thinks he's negotiating, but none of the neocon warmongers that he had picked to surround himself with, none of them want peace with Iran. Yeah. They have all taken turns, participating in foreign policy to destroy all of Iran's allies, isolate Iran, and then destroy Iran. That is always the plan. And you can see how they're setting it up, where the U.S. is pretending to pursue diplomacy with Iran and pretending that there's some gap growing between them and Israel. And then Israel's going to do something indefensible. And the U.S. will say, we were negotiating and we had this. I didn't even like him at the beginning. I didn't like Netanyahu to begin with. And he just went and did this. And then what will be the consequences of whatever the U.S., like you said, Israel, just like Ukraine, is not doing anything without constant and full U.S. support. So whatever they do is going to be facilitated by the U.S., whether it's some kind of strike with conventional weapons or even something involving Israel's many nuclear weapons. It will necessitate U.S. complicity. Absolutely.
I'm glad you mentioned nukes. That is a fascinating thing for me with the nuke thing. I mean, I was having a conversation, I forget who I was talking to, and they were making a point of saying, well, Iran is super aware that Israel has hundreds of nukes. And they've just watched Israel murder hundreds of thousands of people with no compunction at all about doing it, and with complete world not doing anything about it. Meaning the world watched you murder women and children, burn women and children alive, and the world did nothing about the fact that you were doing that, which means you can act with impunity. And the moment that you're Iran and you see that, then you know that there is no Leviathan. Our protection is going to come at our own hands. That's it, nothing else. And if Israel has nukes, which they do, I don't know why the world keeps pretending as if they don't. Everybody knows at this point, even though nobody likes to say. Would they respond with nukes? And what happens if they do? Oh, that is fascinating to me. That is a hellscape of a pathway. But we could hit that. And this could be the last question. Do you think that's where we're going with this? If Iran responds with overwhelming force in retaliation for some kind of strike that Israel does Israel, in that situation, fire off nukes? And what happens if that happens?
I mean, everybody is worried about nuclear weapons. They're worried about a nuclear exchange between the US and Russia, or Russia and Europe, or China and the United States. But I think the culprit most likely to use nuclear weapons will be Israel. The United States has deliberately fashioned it into this junkyard dog, this villain that everyone hates. And just like you say, they're doing these horrible things, and they're desensitizing the global public to literal genocide. I mean, you want to use the word genocide, what's happening in Gaza, because they themselves have said our goal is to eliminate all of these people. And so they're almost as if they're preparing the world for Israel to do something else horrible. Then, there are diehard supporters of Israel. The rest of the world is already convinced that they're bad guys. And all the US has to do is create distance between themselves and Israel, even though they created Israel, and they facilitate absolutely everything Israel does. So that when Israel does it could be a conventional strike, and then the U.S. maybe they have a plan to wade into it, or maybe the plan is we can't defeat Iran with conventional weapons. Maybe we need to use some nuclear weapons. Either way, this is what they're trying to set up. But this is what they've been trying to set up since Bush Jr. And the thing is, Iran and its allies, they have been adapting and maneuvering to try to keep ahead of this. And that's why they're negotiating. I don't think I hope that they don't actually think they can negotiate their way out of this with the U.S. The U.S., because they're sitting there negotiating as if there's something Iran can do to please the Americans. All the Americans want is regime change and to subordinate Iran to U.S. interests. And if Iran is not willing to do that, then there is no negotiation. Everything else is just a smokescreen. They're preparing war behind.
Wow, Brian, we have like over 2,000 people here today. Brian Berletic, a fantastic guest. Brian Berletic is a Bangkok-based geopolitical researcher, writer, and host and creator of the new Atlas. Brian, thank you for this, man. By the way, is there anywhere else people can find you? I always should ask because sometimes people have Substack and other outlets that they also work with.
If you just go to my YouTube channel, The New Atlas, in the video description below are all the other places you can find and follow my work, like Telegram, X. Actually, it's probably just about it. Rumble. I back up all my videos on Rumble. I want to thank you for having me on, and I want to thank everybody who has tuned in.
No, man, I always appreciate having you, man. You're great breakdown. You have a good one, okay? Be safe.
Thank you.
All right. That was a really good segment, and we're going to go from one damn good segment to another damn good segment. We're joined with the man himself, Daniel Lazar. Daniel Lazar is an independent journalist, author, best known as a critic of the U.S. Constitution, American politics, government, social policy in general. He's written several books, including The Frozen Republic, The Velvet Coup, America's Undeclared War. And thank you for the update on this. You can follow Daniel on X at DH Lazar, find his columns on permanentrevolution.org, Democratic Constitution blog at Substack. Welcome to the show, man. How you doing today? You doing all right?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I am doing good. I love that permanent revolution. Is that even possible? I know that this is not what I put you on, but this is, I guess, somewhat of a philosophical question.
No, a permanent revolution is a phrase that it goes back to Marx and Engels. It's the idea that the only democratic force in the world today is the working class, and only the working class can sort of carry through the democratic reforms that are necessary, which themselves then are part of the transition to socialism. So it's an attempt to people tend to separate democracy and socialism, but the argument is really the same. It's the same struggle. The socialist struggle should be democratic, and the democratic struggle, in order to succeed, should be socialist. And that actually affects a lot of, that has many practical implications, involving colonial policy, gender policy, racial policy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Fascinating. There was always this belief, is there this end of history government that is perfect, that can just float above it all, that we've reached this pinnacle of and maybe the answer is no. Maybe the answer is just no. Like, reality doesn't really care about your wants, right? That you need a government to be able to respond to real world environmental phenomena, and environment changes, and your government needs to be able to accommodate the changes.
The political structures that arose in 1945 and after are just collapsing. Yeah. They are an acute crisis. People are very unhappy. They want more democratic instruments of government, and the failure to get them is what's causing, all kinds of disorder, conflict, catastrophe globally. I mean, humanity is the social progress of recent decades is being rapidly undone.
Yeah, but people don't. It's not like changes are made. It's not like people seem to get more politically inclined. I mean, or is that just an American issue? Am I being too much of an American? Where we've become so anesthetized and we just consider, well, you go vote every 4 years, and then we complain about the politicians that we vote for. Meaning there doesn't seem to be this uprising of sentiment to change any of this stuff. I mean, do people even consider the system as being something that's changeable?
Those are all great questions, and the answers are complex. I mean, Trump is a symbol of change in a sense. I mean, it's a very perverse symbol, but people want change, and people voted for Trump because he represented change in their view. I mean, after all, it was Joe Biden who went to a room full of mega donors in 2019, I believe, and said and promised that if he was elected, nothing would fundamentally change. And people did want change, and they voted for Trump in the belief that he represented change. And he did. Not change of a democratic sort, but it certainly is shaking things up and is causing the political structure to go into acute crisis.
Yeah, I guess he is judicial in another way. Yeah, I guess he is. I mean, but this is not the change. Like
I completely and totally agree. But it is a sign that people are unhappy with the status quo.
They just don't necessarily know how to fix it or alter it in any particular way. There's a level of stick-to-itiveness with the system that just doesn't change.
Exactly. And that's where and socialists believe they have an answer to that problem.
Can we talk about Georgia for a moment? So the Georgian, I think it's the prime minister, comes out and he spills the beans. He says, hey, NATO wanted us to open up a second front. And if we didn't do it, they were going to effectively use money from NGOs to try to overthrow our government. And we saw it play out, right? You got, what is that lady's name? That French spy that was president at the time. It was effectively using her position to try to push the prime ministership over. And they wanted effectively Georgia to open up a second front against Russia to overexpand Russia. And the Georgia government was like, are you out of your mind? Look at what's happening to Ukraine right now. Why would we want to do that? And it was like, either you do it or else. That's astonishing. That is astonishing.
Well, it was crazy given what happened to Georgia in 2008. I mean, and in 2008, the president of Georgia was on the phone several times a week with John McCain, the arch hawk in New York, and McCain was urging him to attack Russia. And they did. And it was a catastrophe because Russian troops and tanks rolled into Georgia and came within a few miles of Tbilisi, the capital. They could have gone into Tbilisi, but they really had no point. There was no reason to do so. But Georgia suffered a stunning rebuff. And what a majority of Georgians clearly want are decent relations with their giant neighbor to the north, right. With whom they do a great deal of trade, have a great deal in common culturally. And there are many Russians in Georgia, many Georgians in Russia. They were formerly all part of the Soviet Union, and therefore their two societies were very heavily, interpenetrated. So so they want good relations, and NATO is trying to spark a broad front against Russia. And Georgia didn't want any part of it, and now it's clear that Poland is very leery of the same issue. Poland doesn't want to be dragged deeper into a war with Ukraine.
You explain something to me. So I was going to have the foreign minister of Austria, former foreign minister of Austria, come on. She wasn't able to come on, so I will ask you. You follow these just as closely. What is Europe's motivation here? They're being deindustrialized. Money is fleeing out of the country, like from the standpoint of the weapons that they're spending the money on, or the oil and gas where they were paying like 5 times more for, or buying third-party oil and gas, which is still just Russian oil anyway, just so they could say, well, this is coming from Saudi Arabia. Where did Saudi Arabia get it from? Russia. And they're continuously doing this. And now you got the goofball Starmer coming out effectively saying, I'm going to feed Brits to the Russian military, when he couldn't even field 20,000 troops if he needed to tomorrow. I don't get the motivation. Do they honestly believe that Russia's a threat? Have they bought into their own propaganda for this nonsense? what is going on? Because this is not necessarily working out to Europe's best end. Russia's moved up to like number 4 in regards to the global economy for the GDP. Germany has been deindustrialized. Europe itself has been taking a hit directly because of not having access to cheap energy. What's the motivation with this?
Well, I mean, the motivation is that, I mean, Western Europe came together in the 1940s under the U.S. aegis.
Right.
I mean, it was the U.S. which really put the continent together. Now, I mean, not that the Europeans were passive by any means, but still the U.S. leadership is what really enabled the post-war European order to take shape. But that leadership has fallen apart, and it's not only under Trump. It really began under Biden. I mean, certainly the Nordstream sabotage, which we both know who did that, was an astonishing blow, and it's a blow that really the powers in Western Europe really can't comprehend. They really have not dealt with that issue. They sort of try to forget about it. They put it out of their mind. They pretend, they come up with ridiculous theories that it was 5 Ukrainians on a 50-foot yacht, which is ludicrous. And then they drop it and they hope that everyone forgets. And Trump, by the way, on May 5th, a reporter asked him why he doesn't convene an official investigation into Nord Stream, and Trump said essentially, why should I bother? I can ask anybody. I know who to ask, and they'll tell me what happened, and I know what the answer will be. Right. Now, I'm not very happy with Trump's answer, because I think a formal investigation would be a good thing, would be very important, would be vital, but it'll open up a huge can of worms, which will wind up discrediting the entire centrist European leadership. The only people in Germany that are raising a fuss about Nord Stream is the AfD, the Alternative for Deutschland, the far right-wing party that is supported by Trump and by J.D. Vance, and they've been sounding the cry over Nord Stream, demanding an investigation. But Olaf Scholz and now Merz, his conservative successor, don't want to hear about it because they want to line up support for the Ukraine war, and they know that if the truth comes out about Nord Stream, that the case for further intervention in the Ukraine will be greatly weakened, and the sharks will start circling around the Merz coalition government.
But I got to be honest, this is bewildering to me. Like, when you have Joe Biden who gives a speech and he openly says, if Russia goes in, that pipeline is going to effectively stop working. And the reporter is like, sir, that's not your pipeline. How do you plan on doing it? He said, we'll do it. Yeah. The Russians go in, pipeline blows up. And people are like, obviously the Russians blew up their own pipeline.
It's like if I say I'm going to kill person X, then person X dies, and then I say, I'm glad someone killed him. It looks really bad. It really looks like I am the perpetrator. But that's not all, though. I mean, there's vast circumstantial evidence. The U.S. is the only country with the capability, and blowing up a pipeline at 260 feet below the water is no simple task. You just don't don a snorkel and fins and go down and do it. It takes heavy equipment. It takes special gas tanks. It takes decompressors. It takes a lot of heavy duty stuff. And the idea of doing it aboard a 50-foot yacht is laughable.
Yeah. Hirsch wrote the article on this.
Yeah, Hirsch's article. It still is the best thing out there. It still is the best piece on the sabotage, and everyone, and all the people in authority just wish it would go away. but it's not going to go away. And the problem is that the leadership of the EU just wants the old U.S. back. But it's not going to. But it's not going to get the old U.S. back. It's got Trump, and it's got a war in the Ukraine, and the latest feat by the Ukrainians is undeniably impressive. This was quite a tour de force. But nonetheless, the basic lineup is the same. I mean, Russia has got a GDP which I think is 14 times greater than the Ukraine's. Its population is, I think, it's 3.5 or 4 times larger. I mean, Russia just can bring to bear far greater resources, and in modern warfare, that's what counts. It's the economic power first and foremost. Mm-hmm. And so I just think there's just no question that how this war will end.
But certainly they have to know. Like, for example, we were doing the video showing Estonia trying to go after a Russian ship, and when a fighter comes in, Estonia backs off because that Estonian boat was about to be lit up. Meaning they are rubbing shoulders very closely over and over and over again. At some point, somebody's going to mess up. And by the way, that attack that took place, whether it's 6 planes that were destroyed, 7 planes or 8 planes, I think Ukraine is saying 12. Other sources are saying, I think CNN said they can verify 4. Let's split the difference and say 8. Agreed that it's a hell of an operation. It took them 18 months to do that operation. You can't replicate that. 18 months. Like, it puts me in mind of Thanos in the Avengers, where Iron Man is fighting him, and Iron Man does all of this like impressive stuff, and Thanos is like, "You did all that for a drop of blood." It puts you in mind of that, right? It's like you did all of that time. You took all of this time, and the best that you were able to get was this. Whereas Russia's killed like 3,000 people over the course of the last week. It's not matching up. And to add to this, CNN is reporting that Hegseth was watching the attack live as it was taking place. Now, I don't know and understand why these people believe that Donald Trump didn't know about this or that the U.S. wasn't involved in this. I do not know why they think that at all. I've given a list of reasons why the U.S. was involved. But that is getting very dicey. We effectively was working with Ukraine to hit their missile capacity, their atomic deterrence and delivery systems in a war that Russia full well believes, and is right, that they're fighting ultimately against NATO and may end up in a war with the NATO over the course of in a few years if NATO gets what it wants in order to rebuild its own military fortifications and everything else. That is massively dangerous. Oh, correct me if I'm wrong. Do you disagree with that?
It's completely dangerous. I mean, what this operation does is it ups the ante, and it ups the ante in a way which is ultimately not favorable to the Ukraine. But I take no sides in this conflict, and I'm willing to concede, the very impressive nature of this operation. It shows where warfare is heading. The drone revolution is only a few years old. It's got a long ways to go, and the implications are really, really scary. I mean, there's talk about like bumblebee-sized drones that are fitted with facial recognition, programs. And I can release one now and then fit in, your photograph from this show, and that bumblebee will home in on your forehead with 2 or 3 grams of explosives.
Oh, that's terrible.
It's unbelievable. This is the face of warfare.
This is Black Mirror stuff, by the way.
Yeah, it's Black Mirror stuff. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
But it's the face of modern warfare, and these are devastatingly effective. But drones can be fought, and the the Russians are developing counter drone and their own techniques and their own drone forces, and they are and their advances in the Ukraine are picking up. So Ukraine is losing, territory at a stepped up rate. And I think that the writing is on the wall. I just can't see how the Ukraine can prevail in the long run. Yesterday, the New York Times, on Sunday, the New York Times had an editorial in which the editorial said that any realistic settlement of the war in the Ukraine will involve territorial concessions by the Ukraine. This is the first time as far as I'm aware, that a New York Times editorial has actually said this.
That's impressive. But
they're absolutely correct. Now, Zelensky will never say yes to that. I think there's actually a line in the Ukrainian constitution which makes it impossible for him to advocate that policy. And in any case, if he did say that, the Azov battalion, the neo-Nazi military force that dominates the Ukrainian military, would string him up from a lamppost.
Yep.
So that's the issue. We know what it will take to end the war. But we also know that is impossible. That the Ukraine will never accept such a stance, and as a result, the war will grind on and on for a fairly long time to come until one side or the other collapses. Yeah.
But Europe, and see, this is why I want to bring in Europe also. There is a level of cavalierness with Ukrainian lives that is ghastly.
Yeah.
That I've seen coming out of US politicians where they would say, well, yeah, we're just putting in money they're putting in their lives, so this is a good deal for us. That feels gross when you say it that way. But there's an honesty to it. And the same thing with the Europeans, where they're looking at it as, okay, we need time. It's almost as if they're sacrificing Ukraine, almost like if you had a military campaign and you need to leave 2 people behind that you know are going to die in order to get your entire team out. And Ukraine is that guy for Europe, where they're like, all right, we know we're sacrificing them, but we need you to keep fighting to the last dead Ukrainian while we build up our military industries, while we get our military involved, while we increase our military production. And in 2 or 3 years, hopefully you can keep fighting most of that time. Then we'll be ready to get on the battlefield with the Russians after we've zapped them of a certain amount of strength. That is so grotesque. And, there's a question of, okay, well, why would Ukraine even accept that premise? Well, as you pointed out, the people who are running Ukraine are not on board to hear about this notion of surrender or quit or anything like that. But Europe in this case is thinking of it in the way that America thinks about it. It's just fascinating to me that this is the way this is breaking down. They are doing everything in their power to keep this war going. Everything in their power. Goosing Zelensky's head up. Hey, we're going to help you out. We're going to give you money. We're going to get the U.S. to stay on board and stay in this war and stay plugged in, et cetera, et cetera. And you have Zelensky, who continues to sacrifice his people over and over and over in a hopeless campaign that everybody at this point, with the exception of a few people in Ukraine, knows is hopeless.
Well, there are several things. I mean, first of all, it's not so much they want to keep the war going. It's they don't know how to stop it.
Wait, you mean Europe or Ukraine?
Everyone. Yeah, Europe and Ukraine.
I think Europe wants to keep it going, though. Keep going. Go. Explain your case. I want to hear this.
I mean, it's that a war is a very easy thing to start and a very hard thing to end. Zelensky looked like a hero in those first few weeks after February 2022. In which they fought the Russians back. The Russian offensive was moderate. The extreme, gross incompetence was displayed by the Russian military brass, et cetera. Everyone was cheering Zelensky on. Yeah. But the war soon turned into a long slog, and no one knows how to turn it off. And it just keeps on going. And the Europeans are beset by terrible contradictions. They don't know how to turn the war off either, because if Russia wins And if the Ukraine collapses, I'm talking about like a November 1918 scenario, which is what happened with the Germans, where they finally just collapsed.
Yeah.
If that happens, number one, the Ukraine will have to make major territorial and political concessions to Russia. They will have to, give up Donetsk, Luhansk, the Crimea. They will have to demilitarize. They will have to give up any thought of joining NATO. That will become completely impossible. No NATO troops allowed on Ukrainian territory.
Yeah.
They may be able to join the EU. That's probably open for negotiation, but they're certainly not NATO. They'll have to denazify, change all those streets named after Stepan Bandera, the World War II collaborator. Give them new names. Stop having children in schools singing hymns to "My mother is the Ukraine, my father is Stepan Bandera." And by the way, the vote in Poland reflected a significant anti-Ukrainian sentiment. And anti-Banderite sentiment. People forget that Bandera, his forces probably massacred around 70 to 100,000 Poles in 1943 in the Western Ukraine. It was horrendous. So this is the kind of mass murderer who is the father of the Ukrainian government. It's disgusting. But so they'll have to denazify, they'll have to demilitarize. They'll have to essentially Finlandize. Finland is the country that was sort of, under from 1944 until 1991, it kind of was under broader Soviet
control,
suzerainty, Soviet-imposed neutrality. And I think I mentioned before in a previous show.
Yeah, you did.
That they
were doing like stamps.
Issue a postage stamp on the honor of NATO's birthday, and on the honor of Lenin's birthday, and they also had to be scrupulously neutral in terms of foreign policy. Okay, but that was a golden age for Finland, by the way.
Right.
A time of dramatic economic advancement, political advancement, etc. I mean, Finland did a lot better compared, vis-a-vis its giant neighbor than Mexico has vis-a-vis its giant neighbor.
Right.
I mean, the U.S. has, stomped all over Mexico, not to mention Haiti, Dominican Republic, Cuba, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So Finland got an excellent deal, considering that it was part of the Axis, and Finnish troops had taken part in the siege of Leningrad, in which roughly 1 million civilians starved to
death. Yeah.
So that's the kind of future the Ukraine would face, and I say it's a great deal. Go for it, because you're a small country next to a big one, and it's not fair, but it's not fair being a Mexican either, or being a Canada. And you when you live next to a giant, you gotta tread softly. That's the way the world works. And if I were the Ukraine, I would grab that fast. But of course, it's just not possible.
Not the way it works.
No.
Do you think that part of the problem is that they would have to somehow justify the war if they lose? Like,
oh yeah.
I mean, because I kept saying
we just threw away 500,000 lives. Sorry about that.
It's like how do you? I think it was like when I was at the station, I would ask, at some point somebody's going to say, "What was this for?" And they're not going to have a good answer.
Yeah,
they're just not. It's like hundreds of thousands of people lost their lives for what? Like, you lost, so you didn't even get the win out of it. And this goes back to Aristovich. Aristovich has a clip where he's like, "Yeah, we knew in order to be in NATO, we would have to go through the Russians first, meaning we knew that a war was coming up with the Russians because we knew that NATO was always going to be a red line, but we had to basically endure this test of strength in order to be closer to the West." And you hear that clip and you're like, that is disgusting. That is so disgusting. And now he's a dissident. where you have Ukrainians who are cheering, hoping he gets shot in the head by the terrorists who are running the country, or by the lunatics who are running the country. It's amazing, like what that country has endured and gone through. It's a catastrophe. And
it is. But
do you think there's reconciliation for this? By the way, I mean, you have a better historical perspective than I do. Do you see this as, at some point, water under the bridge, or not so much?
Reconciliation is a very difficult process. I mean, there was reconciliation between France, Britain, and Germany after the war. But number one, that was under the U.S. aegis, which is very important, and actually under the U.S. Soviet aegis, which was very important, and also under the general acceptance of a broad anti-fascist ideology, an ideology rife with contradictions, but nonetheless one that everyone could agree on for a period of roughly 40 or 50 years. And there was also very strong economic growth. I mean, the world was transformed between 1948 and 1973, 25 years of dramatic economic growth, which changed everything. The music people listened to, the movies they watched, the clothes they wore, the relations between generations, between men and women, between among the races, et cetera, et cetera. It was a dramatic change. Now, those conditions do not exist now. I mean, there's no anti-fascist ideology like there was in the 1940s. There's no dramatic growth, economic growth lying in the future. Clearly, the capitalist machinery is slowing down, and actually, if they stopped the phony bookkeeping tricks they do, it would actually be in the negative. And the conditions aren't the same. So therefore, I think you'll see that things will fester. Look at relations between Poland and the Ukraine have been festering since 1648. That is nearly 400 years ago. So I suppose we can say, things will fester for maybe the next 400 years. You and I will no longer be around to see that process.
Horrible. That is horrible. We could end it on this, but I remember I was in Poland. I wasn't heavy into politics like talking about. I didn't know how the Poles looked at the Russians. Oh man, you said that was the candidate that the Poles elected for the the presidential elect. If he is anti-Ukrainian, then he is also anti-Russian. I was shocked at the level of anger in Poland at Russia when I went to the museum, the Battle of Poland Museum, and that's not the name of it. They talk about
the Warsaw Uprising in 1944.
Yeah, that's it. The Warsaw Uprising Museum. Then it made more sense. I mean, they have an entire section of that is a red room, or like a red area where the entire thing is bathed in red, where they talk about the Soviets and what the Soviet Union did to Poland. Basically, Stalin was pissed off at the miracle of the Vistula. And so he was chomping at the bit for decades to get his chance to get back at Poland. And when they finally took Poland, he effectively took his chance. That's the way they look at it. So I get it, but Jesus.
The reality is much more complicated, by the way.
Please.
Much more complicated. Oh, well, first of all, no, I mean, Stalin massacred the entire leadership of the Polish Communist Party in the purges. Right. So the PCP, the Polish Communist Party that took power from 1944 on, was a shattered shell of its old self. I mean, the leaders had all been through the Stalinist terror. They were still kowtowing to Stalin, but nonetheless, there were two forces. There were the pro-Western forces and the pro-Russian forces, the People's Army and the Home Army or National Army. Right. And the National Army, which was pro-London, was riddled with fascists. It was riddled with anti-Semites. If you were a Jew escaping from a ghetto, and you saw in the forest a unit of the home army, you ran the other way.
Yeah.
If you saw a unit of the People's Army, the Soviet-backed People's Army, you ran toward them because they would welcome you as a fellow fighter. It was the exact opposite. In 1948, there were major anti-Jewish pogroms in Kielce, at that town in Poland. The PCP leadership was very heavily Jewish, so therefore much of the right-wing opposition, clung to the old theory of Judeo-Bolshevism. That Stalinism was, and Judaism were just two sides of the same coin. And we see it now. I mean, we see that the Polish right is heavily allied with the church, and the church in Poland is very right wing. It has a serious major anti-Semitic fringe, and there's also an anti-Ukrainian ethnic element, and a very heavily anti-Russian element. And by the way, religion also figures into that as well. I mean, these things are never simple, but there's also Catholicism versus Eastern Orthodoxy. It's quite poisonous.
Daniel, that's why you are a fantastic guest. I don't know if my audience knows this. This wasn't prepped in advance. This is him off the top of his head. This is not like, all right, he studied for this just before. It's not.
I could go on, believe me.
Yeah, top of his head. That's fantastic. Thank you for this, man. I always enjoy these conversations. I always learn something in these conversations, and I always get something out of it. So I really do appreciate it. Thank you for this. And just to give the audience, so they know who you are, Daniel Lazar. He is an independent journalist, author, best known as a critic of the U.S. Constitution, American politics, government, and social policy in general. He's written several books, including The Frozen Republic, The Velvet Coup, America's Undeclared War. You can find his work at D.H. Lazar on Twitter, or X. Screw that. Pluto is a planet. I'm still calling it Twitter. And you can also find his columns at permanentrevolution.org and Democratic Constitution blog at Substack. And I read your message. Yeah, you should start a Substack on your own too.
I have, by the way. It's just getting off the ground. So everyone subscribe.
Well, what's the name? It's just Daniel Lazar at Substack?
Daniel Lazar at Substack.
Fantastic. Daniel, man, thank you for this. I really appreciate it. You have a good day, okay?
Same to you.
Oh, God, I love my guests. Like, look, I always tell you guys, when I bring somebody on, it's usually because I'm interested in talking to the person. And there's certain people who I always learn something from, especially as you just kind of pour into their knowledge. Daniel Lazar is one of those people. He just is. Before we go on, I want to get into some of the attacks that have taken place, that retaliation that Russia has been involved in over the course of the last night. It is true that they're not going to change the strategy that they've been employing, because the strategy has been working. And so they've still been opening areas in liberating territory, especially when you're talking about in the Sumy region. And so one of the things that apparently took place, I guess, last night or overnight or recently, has to do with either one of the politicians in Sumy effectively saying there are no barricades, there's no nothing. They're telling the people to effectively leave. And the Russians have taken more and more territory in Sumy. Now, understand why. Part of the rationale for Ukrainians after the initial incursion in the Kursk failed and got bogged down, then it became, well, we need to hold on to the territory because we want to exchange it for Russia's territory at the bargaining table. Basically, we will give you Russian territory, we want Ukrainian territory back. Putin had already said this is a non-starter. We're not even talking to you while you have access to our territory, full stop. And so then it became, well, we got to stay here because if we leave, the Russians are going to follow us. They were right. That is exactly what happened. As they got pushed out of Kursk, either killed, captured, or pushed out of Kursk, the Russian military that did it just kept going right behind them and right along with them, and have been making inroads into the Sumy region. So apparently, I'm going to put this up so you guys can see it for yourself. Slavyangrad is posting these strikes that took place either overnight or over the last day or so. Nighttime strikes on military infrastructure facilities of the Ukrainian armed forces. On the night of June 3rd, 2025, Russian weapons launched a series of strikes against the enemy or military targets, logistical and industrial infrastructure. Now, the reason I'm showing it is because me saying these names will get butchered. I will do my best. So, Shaska Sumy region. The strike was carried out by the Territory of State Institute Chemical Products, where the enemy placed equipment and chemical compounds used in the production of charges for drones. As a result, the administrative parts of the complex was damaged. Technical laboratories, modular control stations, and at least 10 units of equipment were destroyed. A group of service personnel, including engineer service officers, were eliminated. The fire that broke out covered 800 square kilometers. And by the way, there are several of these. Supernovka, Palavda. Oh, I'm butchering that name. The target of the strike was Poltava airfield, operated jointly with 18th Army Aviation Brigade of Ukrainian Armed Forces. As a result of the strikes, a warehouse with the components Mi-8 helicopters, UAV control stations, and a batch of Western-made batteries were destroyed. The fire engulfed the terminal and 2 warehouse hangars. The total for the fire exceeded 2,000 kilometers. Slabyansk Donetsk region. The first target is temporary deployment location of the logistics support group of the Volron TGR, where up to 5 units of equipment were destroyed, including MAN HX60 trucks and mobile workstations. Second target is the concentration area of the 12th SPP Brigade, where command part was hit, or post was hit. The elimination of at least 7 servicemen, including an officer, was confirmed. Kozak 5 armored car and staff were also destroyed. And of course, you can see several leaders. This one was in Kharkov, Chernigov, Belikaya, Kharkov, Sergivka, Donetsk region, Poltava, Donetsk, and Odessa. A strike at a cement plant used for dual-use facilities for housing engineering units of the armed forces of Ukraine and temporary storage of equipment. The fire destroyed the storage and accompanying equipment. This one strike was carried out for combat deployment area of Tank Battalion of the 117th Separate Mechanized Brigade. A direct hit from Iskander M missile hit the parking area of the equipment. 2 Leopard 1A5 were destroyed. M113 were damaged, and Ivko truck burned. And look, Slavyangrad is very good. Yeah, Slavyangrad is very good at giving detailed information on this stuff. My point is, the counterattack has effectively started. They have began to open up these attacks, including the one that took place in Sumy, where they went after, I guess it was a Brit who was supposed to be the person who was in charge of the other 2 or the other multiple people who were involved that were Ukrainians. And that attack was specific to the train derailment that took place. So you can imagine that people in Russia are calling for blood. Now, I get the sense that Mark and Brian are probably going to carry the day, but I also get the sense that Russia will have to, on some level, show a response commensurate with what has happened there. Dan, give me 1 second. Medvedev, if you always, personally, I think Medvedev is the voice of Russia and a lot of the stuff. He says Ukrainians are playing with fire and will end up in hell. The response would not only be asymmetrical, but crushing. We know where these decisions are made. So apparently that's saying we're hitting decision-making centers. The time for polite settlements is over. Now only iron and steel, neither NATO nor the devil himself can save him. This is what Medvedev said yesterday. So whatever attacks that they have already taken, you can imagine these attacks are most likely going to escalate as a population is getting more hardened and more pissed off at what it considers to be intransigence for Ukraine and, for that matter, NATO at large. Yeah, so there's that. But my man, Dan Kavalik, the man of the hour, at the very least, the man for the next 30 minutes, Dan Kavalik, he is American human rights, labor rights lawyer, peace activist. He's also a professor at the University of Pittsburgh. And Dan, just to make clear, are you currently a professor at the University of Pittsburgh? I apologize if I've asked you this before.
Yeah, no, I'm not, and there's a reason for that, which is interesting.
Well, I'm going to put, wait a minute, can you tell it, or should I not?
Yeah.
Please.
Yeah, so yeah, because I taught there for 12 years and I had great student evaluations and faculty evaluations, and they ended up letting me go over my position on the Russia-Ukraine conflict.
I think you told me this.
Yes.
I think you told me this. That's outrageous. That's outrageous. Look, as somebody who lost their job, also because of apparently I was too seductive to the American public in regards to what I was telling them. I feel your pain on this. It is a painful thing to lose a job, especially when you feel like you're doing God's work. I think some people get us wrong on this stuff. Like I've had people write on as a comment, I can't believe you hate America this much. And as I try to point out to them, dude, I am a patriot. You may not like what I am saying, but I'm trying to get something across to you that your government needs to fundamentally change. It is not working in your best interests. And it's damn sure not in the world's best interests. And me pointing that out, it's not me being the bad guy. You know, the guy who's telling you there's a fire, you can't get mad at the guy for telling you there's a fire. You need to get out the building. So
that's right.
I don't know. It's just unfortunate. I'm sorry to hear that, man. I really am, especially if you enjoy the job, you like the job, and you're.
You know, I did, but it didn't pay well. I mean, it's okay. I landed on my feet. It's all good, you know. But it is an interesting story. So
that sucks. All right, I brought you on because there's some interesting stuff happening in Syria, and I am fascinated by it. You were writing the book on Syria with Kuzmarov, German Kuzmarov.
Yes.
And so I thought you would be a fascinating person to talk to about this.
And I was just in Syria in January, and I was there in 2021 as well, twice. Yeah.
Okay, so the WAPO comes out with this story, and yes, I have it in the Google Doc. That's because I effectively did a Control-A, Control-C quickly before the document could refresh and go to the paywall. So that's why it's in a Google Doc as opposed to being on Washington Post, but trust me, it's Washington Post. Syrian leader faces challenge of foreign militants who helped him win power. And you got to see this in real world terms here. These are Syrian militants killing each other. They're fighting each other.
يا ابو حسين الكبش
Okay, it's a shoulder rocket.
ولا هي الله حيو بنلعب الله حيو.
Then you have other situations like this, all these guys walking around with guns, mean faces. I find all that to be terrifying. From my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, the way the Washington Post is describing it, they're doing a few things that I don't like. They're acting like Jelani is somehow distant from the dogs that he employs. Like that this head chopper is somehow reformed, that chopping heads was just a phase he went through in his 20s, like punk rock, and smoking cigarettes. He did a little head chopping on the side. And that the people who he's employing for HTS are somehow distinct from him. Now, it is true that there were multiple groups that were associated with HTS, but let's be very clear, this guy was one of the leaders of ISIS. He's not absolved from all of this. Him shaking hands with Donald Trump, him saying stuff like, I want to, Israel and I have the same enemy. Okay, well, that's problematic, right? Considering that the people who've been bombing you is Israel. Nobody else has been bombing you. Israel's been bombing you. And so some of these other groups that are more hardcore have taken issue with him, called him an infidel, just amazing, and have started going into skirmishes with one another. As almost, this kind of goes back to Marco Rubio saying that Syria may fundamentally collapse, regardless of removing the sanctions and everything else. Give me your take on this. I want to step into this a bit, but give me your take on just my opening explanation of what's happening.
Yeah, no, what you're saying is true. I mean, certainly Jelani, he basically, his last job was he was the head of the al-Nusra front of Al-Qaeda, which became HTS, which is the current name. But yeah, he's Al-Qaeda. That's what he is. And I certainly think he has, well, I know he has, because he's made statements that have essentially condoned violence that's been happening in Syria, particularly against minority groups like the Alawite community, Christians. At the same time, it's also true that the HTS has 26 different factions, and each faction has factions within it. So it's also true that it is not a homogenous group, and it has many foreign fighters, and that has to be,
Uyghurs,
recognized. Uyghurs, people from, Uzbekistan, Turkey. At one point, the foreign minister of Syria, and this was the foreign minister under Assad, or actually, I think he was the ambassador to the UN, told the UN that they had found passports amongst the opposition fighters from 101 different countries.
Wow. It's just a melting pot.
It's over half the countries of the world.
Wow.
So, but to this day, about a third of the HTS fighters are foreign fighters, and that's growing. More and more fighters are coming in. Why? Because they smell blood and they smell the possibility of building a caliphate in Syria, religious caliphate, right, in which everyone would have to abide by Sharia law as they interpret it, which is a very, extremist form. In fact, some people think heretical form. In any case, so what you have at one time going on is the oppression and murder and exile of minority groups, which, again, is being blessed from the top by Jelani. But yes, you also have some intra-group violence, like what you just showed. You also have, because of the violence against groups like the Alawites, you have secular groups rising up to protect themselves with arms against the government and its related forces. So the possibility, yes, of civil war and a total breakdown of Syria, sadly, is very likely. In fact, I would say not just likely, but probable, given all the things that we've just said. And honestly, I'm not sure that isn't the goal. I mean, when you look at, first of all, the Western powers brought Jelani to power. Okay, they supported him. They're supporting him now, as you said. He shook the hands of Trump, who said he's going to normalize relations and economic sanctions against Syria. As you said, Jelani has said he'd be willing to normalize relations with Israel. He is a Western-backed tool, and the overthrow of Assad was a Western project.
Right.
But look at what Israel, one of the backers of Jelani's, doing. It's destroyed pretty much, right? As soon as Jelani took power, Israel began bombing Syria, mostly its defenses, right? Because even with Jelani in power, Israel, and I believe the West, is interested in utterly disarming Syria, decapitating it, ending it as a viable state, like they did with Libya, like they did with Somalia, like they've done with Haiti, right? Like they did with Yugoslavia. They don't want a viable Syria because even though Jelani is a creation and a tool of the West, he may not always be a reliable one, right? And so they would prefer it just to be a balkanized country that will never challenge the West and in particular Israel again, right? Yeah. So for them, I'm not sure civil war is seen as a bad thing, right, by the West. That kind of chaos is what they actually was very predictable from what they've supported, because they've supported multiple militant groups there, some of which fight each other. In fact, I forget, a major news story, I think it was the LA Times reported years ago that at one point a group that the U.S. or the U.S. Defense Department was funding was fighting a group the CIA was funding.
Yep.
Right.
Under Obama. Yep.
Yeah, and Israel, an official admitted, I think in 2019, that Israel at one time was supporting 12 different militant groups in Syria. Again, not all of which got along. The point is, all this is not just predictable, but I would argue is probably intentional to utterly defang Syria as a viable state. And in addition to all those things, it's being carved up, right? Israel's taking more land. Turkey's taking land. The U.S. is still occupying a third of Syria, its most oil and grain-rich third. Trump has said, he said during his first term, and he said now in his second term, that he wants to withdraw troops from there, but that's not happened. I don't know if that will happen. So it's balkanized by the West. It's being, a nation divided amongst itself in civil war and repression of minorities. It's a disaster. It's a disaster. I mean, Syria does not exist as a nation as it once did.
Wow. I guess their concern is, okay, yeah, we have Jelani, but who knows who's going to come behind him. And
yeah,
as you
probably
point out,
someone worse. I mean, I do think, it's sad to say, but things can always get worse. Yeah, I mean, there are more radical elements than him. And yeah, I mean, the possibility of one of those groups, more radical groups, coming to power is not out of the question. When I was in Syria in January, there were a few things said to me that were, I thought, said in a way that really clarified things. One guy, a Syrian, told me, he said, Dan, the only thing that has united these factions in HDS was jihad and the desire to create this caliphate. And he said, if that's not an element that's left, if that's not something Jelani's, pursuing in an aggressive enough way, then that coalition of all those groups will fall apart, right? People, again, the third of the troops, I think there's about 30,000 HTS troops in total. About a third of those, so about 10,000 troops, are foreign fighters. Mm-hmm. They're not in Syria for a picnic. They're not in Syria to create democracy. They're in Syria for jihad and to set up a caliphate. If Jelani is not with that program, they will try to overthrow him, and they might, So
what was it like when you were there? Because
I was there in probably, I kind of was lucky in the sense that I threaded the needle. That is, I was there after the overthrow of Assad, and I was there before the worst violence against the minority groups, particularly the Alawites, began. There was that violence happening. Alawites in particular, were already being kidnapped, and Alawites, particularly in the town of Homs, were being killed in the hundreds, not in the thousands, like started to happen. And I stayed mostly in Damascus, though made it to Malula. So at that time, I would say the country was, what the part of the country I saw, most of it was filled with uncertainty, like what is going to happen? We don't know. The jihadists, the Al-Qaeda folks were on the streets everywhere. They were the ones policing the place to the extent it was being policed. Now, I went to the town of Malula, which I've been to. That was the third time I was in Malula. It's a beautiful town, which has it's a town built into the mountains. It at various times has been populated by minority groups seeking shelter and safety in those mountains, most recently the Christians. And it's one of the last places on earth that speaks Aramaic, the language of Jesus Christ.
Really?
And was a very important tourist place and pilgrimage place for Christians, with some ancient churches, one of which goes, back to very shortly. A couple of them actually go back to very shortly after the death of Jesus. But when I went there, the town was a ghost town. There was almost no one in the churches, and I talked to a priest who said that a very good portion of the Christians had already left.
No, they're scared.
Left either certainly Malula for Damascus. Some left the country to Lebanon. Yeah, because the group in power, okay, the HTS, which was the al-Nusra Front of Al-Qaeda, in 2013, attacked Malula, tried to destroy it, tried to destroy the churches, kidnap the nuns. Okay, so they are not happy that those same people are now in power. You know what I found out when I was there in 2021, which, it really blew my mind, is, knowledgeable as I think I am about the Middle East and the world, this still surprised me. Do you know who defended that town, the Christians in the Christian town, against al-Nusra Front?
I would imagine Assad.
Assad, but guess who else? Hezbollah. Hezbollah came in from Lebanon, and they protected the Christians, which would be very surprising to a lot of people. It was surprising to me, I'll be honest.
But I didn't get to take that Hezbollah was anti-Christian. I just thought they were.
No, they're pro-Christian. They defended them.
Well, that's my point. That's what I'm saying. Why is it surprising? Like they were pushing back against.
I was surprised. Maybe I shouldn't have, but I didn't understand enough about Hezbollah. I was surprised they went out of their way to defend them.
Oh, I see.
You know what I mean? That they, and they did it again. I went to another church in Homs, which has a very interesting name, the Church of the Holy Girdle of Mary, because they claim to have the belt of the Virgin Mary in the church that they preserve.
Do they? Yeah.
Yes. And that was built. This church is one of the oldest churches on earth. The oldest part of it, which is a cave underneath the current church, was built in 69 AD. Okay. I mean, that's incredible. I mean, some of the Gospels weren't written to like 100 AD.
69 AD?
Yeah. And that church was attacked again by al-Nusra Front, some other groups, and Hezbollah again defended it. So, I mean, people should know that. It's a very interesting thing.
But see, what they are doing, meaning ISIS, them killing that stuff is heretical. Like, I remember when I was in Egypt.
Yeah, I don't think it can even be called Islamic. I mean, that's the thing. They call themselves Islamic, but
it's fascists.
Yeah, they're fascist. They have this. They follow this bizarre philosophy of Wahhabism, which Saudi Arabia has promoted. Which again, many Muslims believe is a heretical form of Islam.
I mean, the way they're going after Christians. Like when I was in Egypt, one of the things. Thank God, this was years ago. But I remember going to one of the mosques, and the guy was trying to explain to me how the Muslim religion also sees Jesus as a prophet. Yes, and how it was like he was showing this kind of breakdown, and how, look, we have zero issue. We have Coptic Christians here. Jesus was, and showing me the significance of Jesus in regards to the Muslim faith. And so if these guys are killing Christians, how is that Islam? Like it just seems like
of course. Well, and they're killing Muslims. Let's also say
and that too.
Alawites are Muslims. Shia are Muslims. They're persecuting those people too. So, I mean, right? They're crazies. I mean, it's probably the nicest way to put it. They're extremists. By the way, you know who else is even more important than Jesus to Muslims is the Virgin Mary. Believe it or not. And do you know Muslims? Again, People need to get wrapped their head around this they need to understand what's happening. Do you know a Muslim family that goes back many generations has kept the keys and protected the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, which is where Jesus's body was buried. That church is not run by Christians, it's run by Muslims. and the head of St. John the Baptizer is in Syria. And I believe it's not in a church. I believe it's in a mosque. Anyway, true Muslims are not, as you say, they're not anti-Jesus. They're not
No.
anti-Christian. You know, when I was in the West Bank in December of 2023, I went to a mosque to pray, really to show my solidarity, you know, for people. And I wasn't doing it right. I was trying to do what they were doing. I wasn't doing it right. And a guy came over, a Muslim guy. And by the way, he said he was from Toledo, Ohio, which I think is great.
Uh-huh.
But if you know Toledo, there's a beautiful mosque right outside it. Okay, I know that because my ex's family's from there. But anyway, he came up to me, said, "Oh, you're not doing that right. You know, you can't put your elbows down. You got to lean on your head. You know, in fact, if you see guys who pray a lot, their head has a bruise on it.
Yeah,
you
they had a
know,
mark on it. Right.
But anyway, he said, "Where are you from?" And I said, "Oh, I'm from Pittsburgh." And I said, "I'm a Roman Catholic." And he said, "You're welcome here." You know, and again, we agreed because Jesus is a prophet, Abraham is a prophet,
Yeah.
Muhammad's a prophet. Those are the three big prophets of Islam. Anyway, and also a lot of Muslims play important roles in Bethlehem in terms of protecting the religious sites there. And as people always say, the Christian churches fared very well, even under Hamas in Gaza, but now they've been destroyed by Israel.
Israel, yeah.
So, I just Americans have to really put their heads around that. I mean, and I understand. I mean, a lot of people don't have the privilege that I've had of being able to travel to these places and see these things, but. And the truth is, again, and I'm probably going a little off the beaten track here, but
You're fine.
I was a fallen away Catholic for a long time, and really it was Palestinians, and mostly Muslim Palestinians, not Christian, but Palestinians, who kind of brought me back to the faith,
Interesting.
because of their fervor. And again, because of their own love for Christianity, which I found incredible,
Yeah.
So
Tell me something. What was Syria like on the ground after, like you said, you were able to thread the needle between the fall of Assad, but before the jihadists took over?
Oh, no,
Did
no,
have
they
coffee
took
shops?
over, but the main violence hadn't started yet.
Oh, I see.
The
Were they still
worst
coffee shops?
violence hadn't started. It was only
Restaurants?
happening in spurts, yeah. But they were fully in charge. No, they were fully in charge. And I saw them on the streets. Again, things were not in Damascus in particular, and I stayed in the Christian quarter of old Damascus. People were nervous, but things were not awful yet because
Okay.
the worst things had not started. So what has happened since I left is in the Christian quarter, which had, and I imbibed in them, I had bars with alcohol that the Christians ran those bars.
Did they? Okay.
Oh yeah, some of those, and I don't know how many, but there's videos of the jihadists destroying those bars, shutting them down, starting to tax Christians for being Christians, essentially. Again, so the worst hadn't started, though I met people, again, at that time, the worst treated, even at that time, were the Alawites. And I met a woman, an Alawite professor whose friend who was a professor, a woman Alawite who had just been kidnapped and killed. And then the woman I met, had just survived a kidnapping attempt. And that's still happening. By the way, people need to know that young women and girls are being kidnapped by this HTS group and sent to Idlib, where they're being forced into sexual slavery. And that was happening during the war, and
How
that's
is that
happening now.
See, this is why the God thing, it screws with me.
Oh, yeah.
Because religion can justify pretty much anything. It's, as I used to tell my mom, it was like, you believe what you believe because you were taught it when you were a child. You just never got rid of it. And, Saudi Arabia was pumping this shit out to different mosques and everything else, saying, hey, you're
Yes.
poor? Okay, we'll give you food and we're going to teach you this. We're going to, like, meaning you caught people who are susceptible to it and dump this into their minds. And for whatever reason, maybe they were sociopaths, maybe they love the power trip, maybe they love the fact that they could take a gun and go murder somebody. Who knows their rationale for it? Maybe they were fully in religious fervor in regards to chopping somebody's head off at that moment. I don't know what's in their minds. I do know it's poison. It's
poison.
Nazism, like nobody's business. How do they justify under religion?
What they believe is they say that the killing and raping of infidels and apostates is not haram. It's not forbidden under their bizarre brand of Islam. And let's face it, a lot of religions took that view. Even, let's face it, Christian missionaries and Catholic missionaries centuries ago would go to America,
but as you point out,
and they would rape and pillage and Native Americans and believe that they could do that, torture them, and if they didn't convert. So, a lot of extremist forms of religion, all kinds of religion, believe that the infidels can be treated that way. I mean, there's even extremist Buddhists who believe that. There's, so probably every major church, there's extremist Hindus who do engage in that. I think every major religion has extremist factions that believe it's not sinful, or in the Islamic word haram, to do these bad things to infidels, So
see, I don't consider this religious. I consider this political. Like, this is no
of course.
different than Zionism.
Well, yeah, there is. I mean, there's political, but I mean, I think in the case, I think there is still a religious element to it. Again, it is masked. I agree, it's essentially political, but at least it's masked in this kind of pseudo-religious thing,
It's just
which they believe in. At one time, can I just tell you? At one time, so in order to be able to travel around a little, I had to interface with some of these jihadists,
Did you? What was that like?
Oh, it was crazy. So at one point, this guy I was with who had a relationship with these guys, and I still don't know to this day what his deal is, but before we went to Malula, he took me to this house, and there were like 10 jihadists in this house, in their uniforms with their guns. And can I tell you something? This is true. And in the kind of on a shelf in the corner, the only thing they had on it was Vaseline. So I didn't know what that was about. But it didn't give me great comfort. Okay.
It's like the Puff Daddy thing, right? It's like, 1,000 bottles of lube.
I was worried about some serious hazing happening. But anyway, I mean, and then after we left Malula, we had to go back to that house, and there were 20 of those guys there, and they looked like, what you would
beards and
envision
guns,
Al Qaeda guys.
Vaseline.
Now, they were friendly with me because he vouched for me. This guy I was with, it was kind of my handler, or kind of my and but I kept thinking to myself, if they Googled me or they figured out who I was, I mean, I'd probably be dead, or arrested, or minimally deported. That would be the best hope.
You weren't going to be
but it was creepy, But that's who's running the show now.
What were they saying to you? I'm super God, man. You've opened up a can of worms at the very end. What were they saying to you? Like, what was? Is like, hello, this is my friend Dan. He's a good guy.
Yeah, he's a good guy. He's from America, which again, that's fine with them because America
that was
brought
fine with
them
them
to
too.
Power. He's a journalist from America, and he wants to report on what's happening here, report on the new Syria.
What did you ask them, and what did they say?
Well, honestly, I didn't ask them a lot. I mean, with these guys, I really, I'll be honest, I didn't say a lot because I didn't know what to say that wouldn't get me into trouble. I smiled a lot. and and kind of went
anything
along
to
to
trigger
get
them,
along.
basically.
Now they brought this translator in for me, a young guy. Now he was very open about his feelings that he's very supportive of these guys. He thought Idlib, where the terrorists are from and live, he thought that was a great place. Though he'd never been there, but he always wanted to go there and he had a totally messed up view of what happened in Malula, blamed it on
Right.
Assad instead of these guys who it was their fault for, and they seemed, again, fervent in their religious beliefs. They were praying at times, and
That's terrifying.
yeah, I mean, I was shaking these guys'
Terrifying.
hands, and I was thinking I'm shaking hands with a guy who probably cut people's heads off with it.
Yeah.
But that's how it goes. And I wish
Oh.
by the way, I so wish I had like a body cam or something. I mean, I wanted to take
Yes.
a photo, but I couldn't do that because it was wild. It was wild stuff,
Wow, that is terrifying. That is a hell of an experience, but that's terrifying.
Yeah.
Because you're right. You don't know what you're gonna. Like, I'll tell you this, and I'm gonna have to let you go. I remember when I was in, I think it was Bethlehem, and the woman who I was with, she was taking me because she wanted me to see her clinic in the occupied areas. And I remember we're in the cab. The guy asked me something like, "Are you religious?" or something like that. And my first response as an American, no, I don't believe in that. And the look she gave me was like, shut up. Like, don't answer that. Just don't answer. Just don't say anything. Like, basically, keep your mouth shut. Like, and I saw, even in a situation where she was walking through the streets, when they found out I was American, they didn't care. They was like, oh, okay, that's why he's earrings, that's why his tattoos. Yeah, they didn't care. However, you did have a few where she wasn't wearing her what is it called? Or hijab.
The hijab, yeah.
And the guy was freaking out, cursing in English. I wasn't even paying attention. I was literally sitting there eating a piece of corn because the guy gave me a free piece of corn as an American. And she snatches away from me, goes and attacks the guy. It scares the hell out of the guy. It scares the living shit out of the guy. And she says, you can't tolerate that nonsense. She was ferocious on either the Israeli side in Jerusalem or the other side against people who are extremists. She was ferocious.
Yeah, you could. I'm sure you saw many Palestinians don't wear the hijab.
They don't. She didn't. She was Belgian Palestinian. She didn't wear it.
You wouldn't know that they're Muslim at all.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, she was ferocious. She was awesome. Daniel, fantastic breakdown. I am fascinated by this. I thankfully you made it out that alive.
Believe me, it was touch and go for. I was glad to leave. I was. Can I just show my book here, The Case for Palestine, Why It Matters, Why You Should Care? I'd appreciate if folks buy it, especially if you get it off Amazon. It really helps my algorithms, and I'm trying to really get that book sold. And then I have a new book on Syria coming out in September. We'll talk about that when it's closer to the due date. So
okay, and it's again, what's the odd name for the book one more time?
The new book, the which book? The Palestine book?
The Case for Palestine.
Yeah, it's The Case for Palestine, Why It Matters, and Why You Should Care. And it has a foreword by George Galloway, former Prime Minister, or it's now former Minister of Parliament of Great Britain. Yeah.
And just be clear, like you said, you can get it off of Amazon. And just for the audience who know, Dan Kavalik, he's an American human rights, labor rights lawyer, peace activist. He was former professor at the University of Pittsburgh. Daniel, thank you for this, man. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Hey, I love your show, and I love you, man. I really think you're a great guy and doing great work, great journalism. And again, if I didn't congratulate you publicly, congratulations on your Serena Shim Award. You really
I thought you did. Either way, thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay.
I really do. You be safe, okay?
You too. Thank you. Take care.
All right, Dan Kavalik, I want to go to my last guest of the day, but not least by any means, the man I want to talk to, and I've been chomping at the bit to talk to all day, Arno Delet. He is an author, political analyst, an international lawyer specializing in international criminal law. His latest book, Foreign Entanglements, Biden, Ukraine, and the Fracturing of American Political Consensus. Arno, how's it going, man? You doing okay today?
Hello, Jamal. I'm doing fine. Thank you.
I need to. There are two things I want to talk about. One has to do with Russia's path to peace memo, which is effectively what they've been saying the entire 3 years, right? Plus the extra territories. But the other one is, I want to get your take on those strikes by Ukraine. And I guess the memo is least complicated. So let's go into the memo first, and then let's bounce into the other one. So Russia effectively just gave Ukraine, if Ukraine thought this was going to disrupt the peace process, meaning that attack, it did not, nor should it have. Russia, of course, went there, and still, this is our document. This is what we need for peace. And it was pretty straightforward. It was basically the most rational thing in the world in the context of what they've been saying that they've wanted the entire way through, and for that matter, the reason that the war took place in general. And just to give a primer on this, and I want to get your take. It says 2 Donbass republics as well as Kherson, Zaporozhye region are officially that officially joined Russia after the referendums. Crimea also voted to join. Those are part of Russia. Those need to be acknowledged as such. Ukraine will have to withdraw all of its forces and armed groups from those territories. Kiev would have to reaffirm its neutral status, introduce a ban on any military activities by third parties. Effectively, you can't have NATO troops in Ukraine, just as a rule. They need to vocally, and I would imagine put it into law, that they're a neutral state. So there's that. They need to reaffirm their nuclear-free status, prohibited acquisition, transfer, or deployment of nuclear weapons. This is probably a direct result of some of the things that they were saying early on before this started, and that insane, deranged British guy. The memo expects Ukraine to set up certain limits on the size of its armed forces as well as military equipment. Does not provide what that number is. Let's see, is one more. Oh, they would have to guarantee the right of Russian speakers as official language. And one last thing, denazification. There's, of course, that, and elections. Give me your take on this. To me, this is rational. And this is kind of the entire premise of the war. Why all of it started, Russia's been consistent all the way through. Whereas Ukraine's document is effectively, we want a ceasefire. That's effectively their document. Give me your take on this, these negotiations in general.
Well, I mean, there you have it. It's pretty straightforward. Again, it's no surprise for whoever's been following the conflict since day one. But you notice that the last point is not the least one, which calls for election. So basically, you are telling whoever it is you are sitting across from in Istanbul that we want you gone.
Right.
You know,
Right.
but it's interesting that it's not. The idea is that we want you gone because we don't, respect the popular will of the Ukrainian people. We want you gone because basically, in as far as one, when you run for election, you run on a peace platform.
Right.
So obviously, you're not legitimate anymore. And two, more specifically, more technically speaking, as far as the legalese of it is concerned, you're not legitimate to even sign any piece of paper.
Right.
So the legal continuity, to the extent we can find a silver lining here, would be for you to abide by our terms, leading to then that 30-day ceasefire that you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So that we could have those elections, and there would be, like I say, that would bind in a way the spirit of the agreement. The intermediate agreement would bind whoever comes out of the ballot box next time around.
Yeah.
So yeah, and obviously that's, as far as Kiev is concerned, it's a non-starter.
It is unacceptable.
So this whole thing, but and I'm not even gonna get into the Ukrainian version on their terms. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Basically the opposite of the Russian terms.
Yeah, but I mean, like,
military, want to be going to NATO, yeah, all this other stuff.
Yeah. I'm actually, it's just the Russians. I mean, they can't afford to be maximalist because of the reality on the ground. But for the Ukrainians, to somewhat, match them. It makes no sense. I mean, yeah, I'll pay you, I'll match you, and I want to see what, I want to see your cards. I mean, no, you're not gonna see my cards.
Yeah.
So it's ridiculous. But it's part of the political process.
Well, that's
I
what
guess
you said.
the yes.
No, no.
Well, I mean, the idea is to try to basically go along with this idea put forward by Trump's team, at least those that are somewhat honest in trying to bring the whole thing to a close, by saying, we're not going to, get in the way of that. But to the extent you might not have realized just yet who you're dealing with, we'll go along so that you can see at some point that this is not going anywhere. And we're gonna have to do what we have to do.
You really think, and oh God, and I guess this goes into the thing. You really believe that there's somebody in the Trump administration that's being honest?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think there are people who want to do business with Russia. So I would say the pragmatic wing of it, which is not to say, as a lot of policy analysts have been saying, that the idea is not to pivot to Asia for a few years until situation allows for resuming what, has been going on in Eastern Europe for quite some time now,
right,
at the tune of billions and billions of dollars. But for the time being, if we take into account this notion of a strategic adjustment, strategic transition, there's obviously those who long to stay there and keep Russia as the main focus, and those, like Ed said, like I wouldn't say Witkoff, because Witkoff is not a policy guy, but probably JD Vance and Ed said would be on the lead on that. It's to pivot to, and actually they were, as you saw, they were, at least Ed said was very vocal at the last Shangri-La defense meeting. I mean, so he's announcing, basically what's next. And so I guess it's yeah, exactly, pretty much. I mean, what is the containment of China? If that's even possible. I mean, still recall Putin's face when somebody tried to allude to this notion. But for all intended purpose, this is where we are right now. And so obviously there are people that are not very satisfied to begin with any kind of talks, real or imagined, and that's the security services agencies, right?
Yeah.
And so to the extent there might have been, and there were, most likely contingent operation going on, being prepared for months, if not years, they decided that this was the time to activate it, so as to kill this notion of peace negotiation in the egg. That's my understanding of it. And the whole operation with the drones concealed in
the trains,
lumber trucks. Yes. Why now? Well, we know why now.
So you think this was done purely to try to spoil any negotiations?
Yeah, it's the old playbook of trying to goad Russia into retaliating in such a dramatic fashion that it will be then milked for all it's worth by the media complex and say, see, we can't leave this region. This is not possible. And as we told you all along, Russia has to be neutralized. Russia has to be stopped. Putin is, out of control. If we don't stop him in Ukraine, he'll gobble up all of Europe. All this nonsense. So they needed that, and they tried, and that's why we haven't heard anything. I mean, we heard this kind of little, allusion, innuendos by Medvedev, but even he, who tends to be so vocal on, whenever he gets the chance, using, extremely vivid expressions. Even on that one, he was somewhat pretty demure. I mean, he alluded to, Yeah, you know, things, you know, we'll get even on our own watch, you know, when we choose it, at the time and place of our choosing. It's only like an Iranian true promise,
Yeah.
you know,
I mean,
we'll get you, but at some point, we'll get you when, you know,
he was more brutal
don't
than that.
worry.
He was saying something like the people who are going to be dead are going to be eviscerated or something like that.
Yeah, but I mean, but he wasn't, you know, usually how he kind of, you know, he unmistakably, you know, refers to the Europeans, you know, without
Arno, I
calling
so
them by
disagree with you
name.
on this. I
Yeah,
agree with you that they were trying to ruin the peace negotiations. Fair enough, agreed. If Russia is behaving, if they're moderating themselves to any degree, under the idea that they're going to get a positive headline out of the West, that is a fool's errand. You're not going to get a positive headline out of the West. You could, Vladimir Putin could birth a baby on an airplane, like literally just carry the baby out on an airplane. It's like, and they would still find a way to attack him. Look at how he's holding that baby. Like,
he was trying to get the air through the lungs, and but in fact, he was trying to
exactly. It's like, oh, he's
slam him against
holding
the
that
wall.
baby in the wrong way. These Russians. My point is, maybe I'm more of a hard ass on this, and I don't know why I'm the one that's a hard ass on this.
Yeah, but you know, to be sure, here it's the same. We have a lot of vocal people trying to say, you know, what's going on. I mean, let's roll up our sleeves and let's get on with it.
Yes.
Let's unleash the Kraken. You know, but obviously, there's right now the mood is that of an unsettling silence coming of the Kremlin. I mean, there's been no, except from Medvedev again, and to the extent he's somewhat the bad cop in that good cop bad cop configuration. I found him on this one to be to the extent we're dealing with, you know, I mean, an extremely provocative attack,
right,
involving not only the train derailments operation, which less than an hour ago, it's official now, have been declared as pertaining to terrorist acts. Okay, so
it was. They waited till the train got there to blow it, meaning they killed
yeah,
those people
exactly.
on purpose.
Yeah, yes, including the crew. The crew are all dead. It happened 4 times, by the way. By and large, a couple of them only were reported, but it happened 4 times. Twice in Bryansk, once in Kursk, and once in Zaporozhye region near Melitopol, I think. So there's this, and then there is the strategic bomber incidents, which have been pumped to make it sound like, you know, they took out what 34% of the entire fleet, i.e., 40 of them. No,
they took like
not
4
even
to
close.
8.
Yeah, and it a lot less than 34% of the entire fleet, to be sure. So, but you know, obviously, yeah. I mean, as far as Ukraine is concerned, and as far as those in the Western deep states who would be keen to keep on, you know, the money laundering operation going, Lindsey Graham and Blumenthal, you know, somehow being the point man on this. That it's par for the course. They always do it like this, and they know it's not going to change an iota as far as where the war is going. But to the extent they know they're going to be able to surf it for a couple of days, media-wise, they're trying to basically tell Trump, you know, why should we even sit down when we can win this militarily?
So,
look,
I guess there are 2 things. One case, it's look how the Russians are. You can't negotiate with them because they've escalated the attacks. And 2, it's
if the Russian gets goaded into overreacting or harshly or lashing out, like if they were to decapitate, you know, the whole Ukrainian regime, well, I mean, you know, that would be perfect. That would be like a godsend for the West.
But there are things.
So that's why it takes, you know,
like I mean, look, I never said decapitate the head of the regime, but there are things that I give an example because I don't. For one, I don't buy for a moment that the U.S. and Trump himself didn't know. I don't buy it. You saw no tweets.
Of course they knew.
Yeah, exactly.
Of course they knew. Vicariously, if Trump did not know about the specifics, by virtue of being commander-in-chief, he knows that it's highly possible, highly likely that his security services are, you know, involved as he speaks. Yes, of course.
Where are the tweets? There are no tweets coming out of Trump. He's eerily quiet, if you've noticed. And at the point where Russia had sent all those missile strikes off, what did Trump do? He immediately, oh my God, Vladimir Putin is going crazy, killed 13 people. Ukraine killed that many.
Wait. There's a difference between knowing about specific operation and giving the green light. Let's say you have a presidential briefing in the morning and you get briefed on a situation, and within that briefing, an operation is somewhat alluded to. You give the green light, you assume that, you take it. Politically, you assume it. It's on you.
Yes, on Trump.
But what I'm saying is, while he knows that his security agencies are not going to tell him everything that's going on, but they are attempt to engage in negotiation, right? In peace process. I mean, why bother with this in the first place if indeed, he's down with keeping the train going a certain way? You see what I'm saying?
I guess what I'm saying is the fact that Trump hasn't said anything about it one way or the other.
Because it's embarrassing, because it means the guy is not in charge. That's what it shows.
Or it shows he's complicit and he is involved in it. And I go further. The idea that Zelensky is going to pull something off like this because as you pointed out, if Trump didn't know anything about it, it's embarrassing. And if it's embarrassing with Trump,
and it's an admission that the president of the United States has no power whatsoever to stop.
But it also risks alienating the president, who has already threatened to walk if he doesn't believe he can get a deal. Which means Zelensky, the UK, the CIA, all of these groups did this, knowing full well that if Trump didn't know anything about it, that it can alienate Trump, who could say, "I'm done." But they did it anyway. Which gives me this.
I know, but look at it this way. If he walks, if this is actually allowed to happen while he's still nominally involved in what's going on, just imagine a second what would happen if he decides to walk. It's like, the cat's away and the mice dances all night. I mean,
but see,
it's party time.
I think he is directly involved in this. And part of the other reason I think he's directly involved, A, I haven't seen any tweets out of Trump. B, they did this with impunity. C, Donald Trump wants Russia to accept his stupid peace plan. And because he wants Russia to accept his stupid peace plan, this is his way of effectively escalating behind the scenes with this fig leaf of, oh, I didn't know anything about this. Whatever. And by the way, this is exactly what he would do. If this happened, would Trump more likely than not say, yes, I knew about it, or would he lie about it? He'd lie. He'd lie. He would act as if he was still trying to be a mediator, while simultaneously escalating behind the scenes, knowing full well that Russia believes he was already involved, meaning the message is being communicated that we are going to escalate if you don't accept my stupid peace deal. I don't buy this notion that Trump didn't know anything about it.
Well, I guess
that's just like, maybe I'm more cynical on this. I just don't buy it. But give me a take. So you think that, and look, I could be wrong, right? So is the?
I think it's being engineered in such a way to send a message that Trump is not in charge. That's the whole idea, that that the deep state would basically send a message to the Russian that no matter what you think, you can get going as far as striking a deal with this guy. This guy is the emperor has no clothes, essentially.
Do you think that's what Moscow thinks? Or do you think Moscow thinks?
Yeah,
Trump was involved?
It's not what Moscow thinks. This is what Moscow has said all the time, including the president of Russia himself several times. He said, "President come and President go. Policies remain." This is what Brian Berletic has been repeating several times as well. So it's out of. I think it's the point is that.
What I mean is, so what is the point of? I get the point of trying to go through the.
For Russia to go along with the what appears to be a kabuki theater, as some have been fond of saying, or this kind of belly dancing. I guess out of decorum, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
This notion that if you can exchange a few thousands of guys, in the context of this negotiation, quote unquote, then you take what you can.
Yeah.
Because as far as they're concerned, that the idea is to try to get their guys back.
Russia, over the night, opened up. I'm very curious on what is the sentiment in Moscow, by the way, but I want to show this first. These are all the attacks that Russia opened up last night, effectively hitting command, industry, factories, etc. And this includes strikes in the Sumy region where they apparently hit the people who they think were responsible for the train bombing.
That's right.
Including killing one of the British mercenaries who's a handler, right?
Yeah.
So they have started to attack. In fact, apparently there was some kind of explosion in Nikolaya, what DD Geopolitics is reporting was a Kim Jong missile that was effectively launched. So they are clearly responding. Meaning, so it's not like they're just taking this and just moving it on. They are clearly responding in a way to get across. This is unacceptable. I guess my question is, what is the sentiment in Moscow? What is the public thinking at this point? Because you're right, Russia's been eerily quiet. I saw Putin give his first speech. He said nothing about it. He didn't bring this up. He was talking to some delegation saying, hey, we have this history together, et cetera. He spent 4 minutes. It was like, I'm up. Didn't bring it up at least. No. Medvedev is the only one that I've heard say anything about it. That's weird. That's very strange. It's freaky and even. What is being said in Moscow on this?
You mean on the street?
On the street, on TV, government?
On the street and on TV. Well, I mean, I guess the TV personalities are out there trying to channel what is obviously a growing frustration, if not outright anger, as to what happened. To be sure, I mean, look at the train derailment. We're talking about civilians, right. People who have nothing to do with all this. So you have to channel this anger, but you cannot allow it to somehow dictate as a decision maker, the way you're going to handle it. So it's a complicated situation. So there's a two-pronged approach, an approach predicated on keeping your nerves as far as replying to the situation, addressing it.
Yeah.
And then a prong that's aimed on for domestic purposes, which obviously has to somewhat provide for a place where people can exult, vent out their frustration, So I guess that's the job of shows like that of Solovyev's, for instance. Solovyev's very vocal to begin with, so I'm sure through shows like this, people can call in and vent out, and it's not going to be obviously making any difference, but this is what those people are. This is what their job is. Especially in situations like this one, to try to control, to channel public anger,
outrage,
and outrage. Yes.
I have to be honest with you. This annoyed the hell out of me, because part of it, my feeling is, and maybe I'm wrong on this, I felt like there's a level of complacency. That there's a lot of triumphalism of, we've won this war. And while nothing changes tangibly on the battlefield, agreed. And while Russia's strategy is working, meaning they got this propaganda win, but the reality of it is Russia's still moving on the ground, especially in Sumy region, especially in the liberating villages. They're killing the Ukrainian military to the tune of like 3,000 or 4,000 over the course of the last week alone. So you have real tangible gains versus this kind of, it's a hit. It's embarrassing. But in context of what Russia's been doing on the ground, it doesn't ultimately matter. I guess my thing is, there should be consequences for this. And the longer this war goes on, or the longer this gets dragged out, the more opportunity NATO has to effectively attack Russia from the shadows as if they have nothing to do with it, and pretending that Donald Trump is somehow a mediator when he's a direct belligerent in the conflict seems insane to me. But that seems to be the way that media is trying to cast him, which I don't buy that premise. Donald Trump is a belligerent in all of this. Give me
He
your
is.
thoughts
I
on
mean, he represents the prime mover of this whole conflict. I agree with that. It doesn't mean that he doesn't realize that as far as the uniparty, the policy paper approach is concerned, this is not what I've been instructed to do. I've been instructed to wind it down here, come back to it later. My successor, or successors will pick it up where I left off. But for the time being, we have to. And there's the, if we can make money out of it, he and all his entourage and the Witkoffs, and they've made out like bandits on those coins operation. So if they can make money, with some of the Russian, deep-seated interest, for the next few years, they want to privilege that. That's to me, that's pretty much the way they look at it.
So are they? So is Russia just hoping Trump walks? Because the fact that he hasn't said anything, the fact that he only sees what Russia does and never sees what Ukraine does, the fact that he's still giving intelligence to stuff like this.
Well, it depends what you mean by walk. I mean, if he walks, and that means there's not going to be any renewed under his watch. Yeah, then he can walk. Yeah, and Russia will finish it.
But if he doesn't,
if he doesn't walk in that sense, then we have a problem.
I think you guys have a problem. And look, I'm saying that because it's one thing if Donald Trump
I'm not saying we as Russia. I'm saying we, the whole world, we have a problem.
Right, yeah.
Because from that point on, it can only be escalating to the extent there's still room for escalation. And with what happened the last couple of days, actually, it might be in Russia's interest in the sense that for the last, since the beginning of the operation, a lot of people some people, and not the least influential, have been somewhat voicing out their opinion that we should call it what it is, which is a war, and not this kind of throwing around operation terms. But for a lot of people, they don't want to call it that here. They don't want to mobilize people's mind in such a way that people are willing to roll up their sleeves mentally, spiritually, and if need be more than that, to defend the country. That's what it is. It's become this kind of background noise, for a lot of people. Once in a while, there's going to be featured stories about drones over urban centers, but by and large, this kind of no man's land is in this kind of undefined state of affairs. I personally think has not been helping Russia. I think you got to call things out for what they are, so at least people are on the same page. And right now, I don't feel like people are on the same page, which is why when you have incidents, quote unquote, like what happened the last couple of days, there's a big disconnect in people's mind, because as you said, a lot of people thought that this was under control in the remote area, that reports coming in are positive, and they've been so, and the economy is booming, and so on and so forth, and Russia is not isolated, far from it. We're enrolling and registering more and more support from the global south, and et cetera, what have you. And then suddenly you get hit deep down in what's called the far rear. It's called the far rear, 4,000 kilometers east of where the front line is.
Right.
And the operation is supposed, it's almost like the equivalent of 9/11 with cutting cutters and cardboards and whatever, with some kind of do-it-yourself at home assembled drone, put into, and it was very ingenious. We have to be honest about it.
Very much so, yeah.
And the security services here were caught flat-footed completely. So that's really egg on the face of the whole state, if you ask me. I mean, that's my opinion.
Yeah.
If heads are not rolling after that, But we won't hear about it for sure. Those things
You
are
say
done
we won't
quietly.
hear about it if they do. Oh, like
No,
the
of course not. Yeah, yes. So yeah,
I think there are a lot of us who want a stronger response. That's all. And maybe that's, and I don't mean belligerence. I don't mean killing people for the sake. I don't mean any of that stuff. I'm talking about, like, I give you an example. All of these targets that I just showed that were there, Russia knew about these targets already. Why did these things continue to exist if they already knew about all of these different targets? Meaning they hit all of these things last night, which means they had to be aware of all of this stuff. And yet, for whatever particular reason, they weren't being proactive in defining a target, destroying a target. They waited. I'm saying, why are they waiting? And what are they waiting for?
that's a good question. I mean, a lot of people have been alluding to what you're saying, including the existence of the 17 bridges connecting, one side of the Dnieper River to the other, and asking, to the extent civilians may be taking those, using those bridges, there might have been a reticence, to, as far as reconstruction costs, as far as the winning hearts of mine. That probably are a lot of elements bearing on those lines, the financial cost of rebuilding afterward, and the trying to not aggravate, the population at the end of the conflict, when the conflict is called one way or another, But in the end, I mean, it's war. You're waging war, and it's you're right. It allows the logistics and the predicates for operations like the one we've seen yesterday.
You don't
But
think that the Ukrainian population is already agitated?
well, it depends on what area. I'm not saying they're not, all like saluting when a Russian reference passes by in front of them, but
Yeah.
by and large, in the eastern part of the country, people
I
are
see.
pro-Russians.
I see.
So you want to make sure you don't just come in and just
That's
blanket bomb everything.
Hey,
I'm on your side here.
Yeah, I'm sounding
Otherwise,
like a
I mean,
warmonger. I'm sorry. Like I sound like a hard ass. I just
if
saw
the
that and I'm
idea,
like, why are they playing around?
no, but that's why it's such a complicated conflict, because it's a brotherly state, it's a brotherly nation. It's the same people, and so you don't have this dehumanization. I mean, war is hell, to be sure.
Yeah.
But they're trying to somehow. Somebody here said it's an exorcism. This is what we're dealing with. So you don't want to kill the host. They're possessed. They're not. They don't have their mind. Rightly put these days. It doesn't mean we should whack him. As a final solution.
But they hit those targets anyway.
But at the same time, if they are, boxed in, they'll show themselves to be extremely efficient. There's also the issue of the fifth column inside Russia. I mean, there's 5 million Ukrainians living in Russia,
right?
Including among those Ukrainians who got by now Russian citizenship, people who might have been living in the Donbass area, but who were supportive of the 2014 coup in Kiev. And that's actually a major problem here. Because those drones, they were not assembled and then shipped, by and large. No, they were. I mean, from what I understand, in one of the air base that was attacked, the drone manufacturing facility was located a few stone throws away from the base.
Wow.
So yeah.
Wow.
So they assembled it almost within striking range of it's crazy. So that, to me, that's the major problem we have, a security problem.
Wow.
Because if we just imagine that of 5 million Ukrainians living in Russia, if we just consider 1% of 5 million, that's a lot of people.
It is a lot of people. Wow. But that can't be a rationale to not be aggressive and prosecute the war, because those people are there either way. Meaning those people are going to feel some kind of way either way. They're already there. There's nothing you can do about the fact that they're there. And you prosecuting the war, it's not going to change what those people do. They're going to do what they do anyway. I mean, for God's sake, they just assembled a bunch of drones and tried to take down your entire plane fleet.
No, I understand, but I think what we should really somewhat extract out of our conversation is that it's not that much the issue of hitting all those target, database target that you showed on the screen.
It's internal.
It's internal. They're gonna have to clean their act here at many levels, because there's been a lot of somewhat, whatever you want to call it, complacency, sloppiness. Russia is a complicated place to run, right? So it might seem really clean, sparkling clean on the very top tier, on the veneer of it, but Russia has had a long history of, as far as the, once you start going down in the power structure, it's a constant battle. It's a constant battle.
Wow.
How to have, people who are really dependable, that you can rely on, that are going to do the extra thing to make sure that doesn't happen. So it's a whole mindset, and we're 25 years into Putin's presidency, and we're still dealing with this, with the consequences that we see. So it's not that much a clear-cut, stark, black and white. We know we did it, and as you said, they identified that those British in Sumy, they were probably the one who received the intel from CIA and carried out then, somewhat, the operation from a forward command and control center. But then you have all those internal, they were only able to get away with this by exploiting fault lines and shortcomings within Russia. And this is why somehow there are such a silence going on right now.
Wow. Arno, thank you for this. Thank you for listening to me, bitch.
No, this is no problem. But this is why we have this. It's called dialectics. You come from one way, I come from another, and then otherwise, and there's no point, and nobody's learning nothing.
I was. I've been somewhat of a hard ass.
That's right.
And Mark was like talking me down. Mark was like, "Yeah, man, you don't want to react too bad." And then I think Brian was like, "Yeah, you don't want to react too bad." And I'm like, "Okay, am I the only hard ass that I'm talking to about this?" I'm like,
"But you know how they call this in this? I heard that this doctrine in military general staff circles in all countries, or at least a few of them, they have this doctrine called of the tense man." Because there's this sense of mimetic sociology, in military headquarters. So everybody, basically goes along with what's being said for whatever reason, So they have this doctrine of the tense man, and the idea is that if 9 of them all basically agree that it's white, it is the tense man's job to come up with
red.
Yes, no matter how outlandish it might sound, but it has to be, somebody has to basically say to the others, "You're wrong."
Yeah, I guess I'm going to on this because
ultimately, it might actually be what's that guy saying that saves the entire project, whatever project you're talking about. Then it depends on country to country, but saving the day. Let's call it saving the day. The tense man's doctrine. Look at
American. And from our point of view, that shit would be unacceptable. Like, can you imagine how America would respond if Russia or China got somebody or worked with somebody to have drones to blow up strategic nuclear assets
in
various
New
parts of it,
Mexico.
we would lose
Yeah.
our minds.
Yeah, you use Mexico as a proxy, and at some point you get deep into what's it called, White Range or whatever, New Mexico. They
Yeah.
have strategic. Yeah, well, that's the same thing.
We'd
Yeah,
lose our minds.
I can imagine. Yeah. Oh my God. I mean,
Mexico would not exist the next day.
everything will be vaporized. Yeah,
Yes.
within days. Yes, I agree.
So that's where my take comes from. I'm
Yes,
ultimately
yes,
from here, right?
yes.
Arno, thank you for this. I really appreciate it, especially at short notice. Arno Delet, and great breakdown and great explanation of what was going on, the thinking that's taking place internally. And cooler heads are probably right. So I don't think you're wrong. And by the way, adding more context, the internal is something new that I don't think anybody else has brought up before, that I think you're also right about, because a lot of this stuff happened internally too.
Well, because it's somewhat of a dicey subject. So you have to. It doesn't mean you should not approach it. You should not deal with it, but you have to somehow. The temptation is to relay propaganda from the FAFO crowd, right? NAFO crowd, not the FAFO crowd, the NAFO crowd. Yes. So so you have to somehow be more measured. But yes, it is an issue, and it should be discussed. This is what those podcasts are all about.
Very fascinating. Arno Delet, he is author, political analyst, and international lawyer specializing in international criminal law. By the way, do you have another book out, or Foreign Entanglements, Biden,
No,
Ukraine,
not
and
yet.
fracturing of? Okay.
This is the one for now. Yes.
Okay, so his latest
And with
book,
the auto pen scandal, from what I understand, is being the talk of the cable show scene in the US. And that's the time. This is the time to buy the book. Buy the book.
Well, the name of it, Foreign Entanglements, Biden, Ukraine, and the Fracturing American Political Consensus, auto pen indeed. Thank you, man, for this. You have a good night, okay? Be safe.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right. Great conversation with Arno. Yeah, I feel like, I guess I'm the 10th man in this one. Everybody else has been far more measured than my take. But again, I'm an American. I was born and raised in America. And I'm an honest actor at that as an American. Meaning, when I point out the Cuban Missile Crisis and I say, okay, well, this is how we responded in the Cuban Missile Crisis, so how are we saying that Russia's wrong? I'm saying that because I'm being honest about this is our take. This is the way we dealt with this situation. How are we taking issue with somebody else dealing with it in a different way? If that happened to us and Russia or China had assets in Mexico to send trucks full of drones to blow up strategic assets, can you imagine the U.S. response? Can you just imagine the U.S. response? It wouldn't be this calm, measured, yeah, I mean, we just need to keep the strategy going. And so we'd lose our minds. We'd lose our minds. Mexico would cease to exist. Jamal is on fire today. I love his monologues. Oh, thank you, Auntie. Thank you. I appreciate it, Auntie. And yeah, I ran late. I didn't even see, I didn't even hear Brian come in. I just greatly dislike this idea of people pushing this thing that Trump is not involved. It just doesn't make sense that he's not involved to me. It seems the most obvious thing in the world that he is. Definitely the US is involved. If Hegseth was effectively watching it take place, there's a stone's throw between Hegseth and Donald Trump. How the hell is Trump in the dark? And again, as I point out, there's no tweets. Donald Trump before him was like, oh my God, Putin has lost his mind because 13 people died. I agree with you, 13 people dying are bad. There were hundreds of missile strikes when those 13 people died. And the missile strikes that Russia did was in response to 1,400 missiles coming from Ukraine. But Trump is blissfully unaware. And when he's blissfully unaware, they would say, well, Donald Trump doesn't read. He hasn't had Tulsi Gabbard's pop-up book yet. He hasn't had his coloring book for national security that can explain stuff to him, in crayon and pencils. And it's like, okay, dude, come on. I understand he may have the intelligence of a zygote. He's a grown-ass man. He surrounded himself with his own people. What is explained to him is still a factor of him because he chose those people. And I don't believe for a moment that Trump, who tweets about everything, had nothing to say about this. And that goes into two parts. A, he didn't have anything to say about it from the standpoint of his tweets, but he had everything to say about Russia. Ukraine murdered a bunch of civilians in a terrorist attack against a train and killed more people in that terrorist, or just as many people in that terrorist attack than Russia did with hundreds of incoming missiles. Put it in context. No tweets. Oh my God, Zelensky is crazy for killing all of these people. Oh my God, this is just before the peace summit. How dare Zelensky do this? I'm going to walk. I'm Donald Trump because Zelensky is not interested in peace. None of that came out. None of it. And even more to the point, as an addendum to that, as I pointed out earlier, Zelensky did that with impunity. Now, it was Donald Trump that forced Zelensky to go to the peace talks in Istanbul. Okay. So on some level, Zelensky is there in order to play monkey for Donald Trump, to act as if he's involved in peace talks. Okay, fair enough. So what does it look like when your proxy does this attack, dramatic, effective-ish, the day before peace talks? What does that insinuate to you? Okay, any rational person, it would insinuate that the person wasn't interested in peace talks. Any rational human being. And if Donald Trump really did not know anything about it, was really interested in peace talks, and his proxy has just done some shit like this. Okay, for one, it looks like you would take issue with the train thing because you basically committed a terrorist attack where you killed all of these people. And two, it looks like you would take issue with him humiliating you by doing that attack on planes. Those planes are legitimate military targets. Don't misunderstand me. It is fair game for Ukraine to go after those airplanes. I don't take issue with that. I take issue with this idea that Donald Trump, supposedly, people are acting like he didn't know anything about it. Oh my God, he didn't know anything. Trump said he didn't know anything. So the president that's a habitual liar says he doesn't know anything, and the people immediately say, well, Trump said he didn't know, so apparently he didn't know. You're out of your minds. You're out of your minds. The idea that Zelensky and Europe are terrified that Trump is going to walk because they can't carry the burden on their own, and yet will carry out an operation like this that would ideally humiliate the president, which could push him to walk, seems outlandish. Seems outlandish. Trump sees it. And if he's being on the level, his first thought as a rational human being, also Zelensky's not interested in peace talks because Zelensky just did this, which tried to put the kibosh from the talks. But that wasn't his reaction. His reaction wasn't to say anything. I suspect it wasn't to say anything because what Trump knows is he already knew it was happening. And he knows that Russia knows that it was the US was involved. And so it's like Trump knows that Russia knows that the US was involved. And Trump knows that Russia knows that Russia knows. And the entire point of all of that is to try to put pressure on Russia to accept a stupid peace deal because they're not accepting a stupid peace deal. And so, yeah, we're going to blow up railroads. Yeah, we're going to attack all of these planes. We're going to do all of this stuff because we're trying to get you to accept a deal that up to this point you've been unwilling to accept. But I don't want to openly say this, so I'm going to act as if I'm a mediator, that I didn't know anything about this, or just not comment at all. Would the habitual liar lie? Yes. Yes, he would. Especially if he's pretending to be a mediator and not somebody who's prosecuting a war, which is exactly what he's doing. He's giving intelligence, money, weapons, prosecuting a war. The terms that Trump laid out in his peace deal are so ludicrous and outlandish. I don't know how anyone comes to the conclusion that he actually wants a peace deal. And maybe he wants one on US terms, but the US terms are utterly absurd. And so you're getting beat on the battlefield. You don't get to dictate terms. I guess my point is he's trying to push it to get them to accept terms that they're not in any way going to accept, with the idea of using escalation as a way to do it. Otherwise, you would thought Trump would have gotten so frustrated, he would say, I'm out. You guys are horrible people. There's no way I can deal with you. You don't want to have a deal, so I'm out. I'm walking. That's not what he did. Oh my God, I can't believe Zelensky did that. That's horrible. Nobody told me about it. You killed all of these people on the train. You killed 12 people in a terrorist attack. I'm out. He didn't do that. There were no tweets. There was nothing. Trump tweets about everything. Nothing. It's just like, I just find it to be outrageous that people are like, no, Trump didn't know anything about it. They're acting like he's an infant. Act like he's an infant. Oh, he's an infant. And they always make excuses for him over and over again. As a point out, the CIA is all throughout Ukraine. All throughout Ukraine. It's been there for decades. And you're trying to tell me an operation that took 18 months to plan and enact, and at no point did the CIA, who's supposed to be spooks and supposed to figure shit out like that, couldn't figure it out. It's just amazing. And then you had analysts saying, Trump should call Putin immediately. Again, they drink the Kool-Aid, acting as if Trump knows nothing about it. I just find this to be outlandish. I'm sorry. Thank you, Auntie. It's just, it annoys the hell out of me. That's all. Sparky, don't leave a rump state called Ukraine. Let it remain a NATO playground, a carpetbagger's money laundry, and BlackRock's property. Yes, effectively, let's leave part of Ukraine as a rump state so NATO can effectively infest it fully with weapons, guns, money, and everything else. And so in 5 or 6 years, they can redo this whole thing again. Sure, that's exactly what Russia is supposed to do. It makes no sense. Agreed, Sparky. Fun fact, both Ukraine and Israel have taxpayer-funded healthcare, American taxpayers. Yes, they do. Yes, they do. I think I've told you the story before. When I was in Israel, I needed pain medication. I didn't have a prescription, so I had to go to a doctor. I found this weed doctor. The weed doctor was still a real doctor, and so he could write prescriptions. And he was like, hey, Dropathy, you're taking some pretty heavy meds. Have you ever tried weed? I was like, dude, if weed was the issue, I'd be cured. He says, okay. He says, okay, I write you a prescription. I pay out of pocket, and it is cheaper than when I pay with insurance. Same thing in Albania, by the way. Getting payments ended up being $13 for both payments. Yeah. Thank you for your work. Brian is a good guest. Right about everything since 2022. Brian is a fantastic guest. I agree with you. Sparky, I guess some people need to read as a crutch. It just trips me out. They're like, well, Trump don't read. And they just leave it at that. Trump doesn't read. He needs a pop-up book. He needs coloring books. Maybe Russia could have some anti-drone nets, but those strategic bombers were out in the open. Yes, they were. Satellite observable for the START Treaty. That's what I thought. And that's what I keep hearing. I need to verify that. But from my understanding, that the US and Russia are supposed to have those things out in the open so they can be verified through satellite imagery to ensure that those things aren't going on a bombing run or something like that. Now, if that is true, that START Treaty is over. If that is true, that's a much bigger deal. Because what it means is that the US, the UK, and Ukraine engaged in an attack on airplanes that they knew were going to be out in the open, because by treaty, they had to be out in the open, which means that we join in an attack using information that we have from our satellite imagery because we knew where they were and that they were going to be in the open. That's a big fucking deal. That's a big fucking deal. Let's keep going. Sparky fun fact. Drunkard, tattooed circus freak Pete Hegseth, that deranged lunatic, was introduced to the media around 2010, but his mentor, Lindsey Graham, prior to that, Pete was Lindsey Joy Boy. Oh, Joy Boy. Was it Miss Lindsay if you're nasty? Pete was his Joy Boy. Sparky, you can't make this stuff up. No, you can't make this stuff up. Mr. Sports, super sticker. Thank you, Mr. Sports. Mr. Sports. Jamal, it occurred to me the other day that the Dutch East India Company was what we now call NGO. What do you think? Is there nothing new under the sun? Really? That's not really an NGO, is it? I mean, that was a company, Dutch East India, non-governmental organization. Why do I think that's a company? I just think that's a company. I don't know if that's considered an NGO. I could be wrong, Sparky, but I think that may just be a company. Muhammad referred to Jesus Christ as his brother. Go ahead. When you hear Muslims mention Jesus Christ, they say, may peace be unto him. Yes, they do. Yeah, I got a lesson from that when I was in Egypt. The guy in the mosque was very nice. explain a lot of stuff. All subject, please tell the Russians on behalf of Black Americans, we unconditionally surrender. Please don't hit Black cities. Seriously. Oh, that is so sad and unfortunate. That is so sad and unfortunate. It's not that I think they're going to hit America. I think they're going to pound the shit out of Ukraine. Western intelligence is incubated and encouraged fundamentalist Islamists. Yes, they did. It was not, if not created them, to go against USSR during the Cold War. Yeah, this was Brezhnev's, right? No, Brzezinski's plan of trying to drag the USSR into its own Vietnam. Western intel still uses them, though they're often out of hand. Yeah, Pakistan. If you remember when Pakistan, the guy was doing the interview and he pointed out, he says, well, yeah, the West used to use our terrorist groups also. And if you're looking at what is about to take place in Syria, where we're going to have a haven of jihadists up for the highest bidder, I suppose. Sahel states, I'd be concerned about that. China with the Uyghurs. I mean, all of these goofballs and whack jobs are effectively in one place now that can be spread out around the globe. So definitely be paying attention to that. Adric Hope, is that right? Hope? Okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Hope sounds worse. Movie quote, World War Z, 10th man rule. Is that what that comes from? And by the way, it's a good idea, right? If you have 9 people, because usually what happens is the other way around. If you, in some of the experiments, what would happen, some of these famous experiments, you can look it up online, where let's say it would be one person in the group. That one person is the person being experimented on. He doesn't know what the experiment really is. And a person will say, okay, I am holding up a number. Let's say the number is number 3. And you now write down the number that I'm holding up. And the first guy writes 4. Second guy writes 4. Third guy writes 4. Other guy writes 6. Another guy writes 5. And what he does is, what is that guy going to do? He knows, he sees with his own eyes that that number is 3. He knows as a flat fact that that number is 3. 30% of the time they write down another number. They won't write down 3. Yeah, that's just fucking rough. Rentier oligarchs, what is it? Rentiers. Genuine question. Was there ever an assassination versus Putin under Biden? No. The U.S. garrison state seems far more aggressive under Trump. Not that I'm aware of. I mean, so assassination, no. Attempt to overthrow the state, yes. If you remember the guy from Wagner, I can't think of his name. It'll come to me in a moment. I can see him, but I can't think of his name. The one that accidentally died in an airplane crash. Accidentally, of course. No fault of the state at all. Accidental death. That guy who was supposed to stay out of like Moscow, St. Petersburg, somewhere else, and he kept fucking around. That guy. Oh, I can see him. I can't think of his name. But that was when the West was cheering him to overthrow the Russian state. And if you remember, if I'm not mistaken, he shot down helicopters, all sorts of shit. Eventually, he de-escalated. But the West was cheering him on and knew in advance what he was planning on doing. Apparently, he was working with like Western intelligence or US or Ukrainian intelligence. And so, and I'll go further. Do you remember that kid who was with the National Guard, who wrote all of that stuff in like a Reddit post? Was it Reddit? It wasn't Reddit. It was like a video game forum or something. But he was writing stuff that he saw in the National Guard's like archives or database. And that was in it, that guy was working with the Ukrainians. And of course he goes, oh my God, this is outrageous. This is not happening. I can't believe he said that. And come to find out he was. So tried to assassinate Putin. I mean, Ukraine is getting desperate. The West is getting desperate. But tried to overthrow the government? Yes. Yes. So yeah. And they are getting desperate. I mean, look, I don't know. Yeah, they are getting desperate. Yeah, I agree. Your show keeps getting better and better. Black in the Empire. Thanks, man. I appreciate it. I try. I do my damnedest. It freaks me out. If I'm being honest, it freaks me out. Because it's not a pre-programmed job. Like even software wasn't pre-programmed. You assume that you can do whatever somebody needs you to do for a particular project. But that may not be true. There may be some projects where you're like, okay, I have no fucking clue how to do this. For the show, you're always going into it blind. And not just going into the show blind, you're going into the month blind. So you don't know how many views you're going to get on a video. You don't know what the audience is going to bite. I got to be honest with you. There's some videos that take off where I'm shocked as shit. And there are other videos that do poorly where I'm shocked as shit. It's a crapshoot sometimes. And you don't know what you're going to make month to month. So you may do well one month, but next month is a blind month. And the month after that is a blind month. And you don't know if you're going to be able to get your guests. You don't know if you're going to be able to, something is interesting in the media to talk about. All of that stuff is just blind alley. So it freaks me out. But as I said, do my damnedest. That's all I can do. All right. I'm going to end this because I have a lot of work and I'm going to be on Sabby Sab show in the morning, which for me is going to be fucking painful. It's 10:30 for me. I'm still jet lagged because my clock is still oriented to Eastern time zone because I do the show as a morning show. And so I'm still tethered to ET, even though it's 10:30. After I cut videos, upload those videos, and I still have to pay attention to what is taking place in the US because, again, there's a 12-hour time difference. And so the day still goes on. It's going to be 3, 4 in the morning when I finish. And so you can imagine being up for her at 7 is going to be brutal. It's going to be absolutely brutal. But she's come on my show all the time. I'm happy as can be to be on the show whenever she wants me on the show. Same thing with Sarah Bills. Sarah comes on the show all the time. She'll be up at like 6:30. So I don't feel like I can bitch all that much. I'm going to somebody's show at 7. Especially since the irony of it all, I run a morning show. And so the show goes on at 7 a.m. anyway. And even when I was in the States, I would have to be up at like 5 a.m. In order to get the show prepared. And even 5 a.m. wasn't early enough. It really should have been 4:30. It takes about 3 hours prep time to get the show started, like to get everything up and running. And then several hours prep time after the show in order to finish all the videos and everything else. I'm happy to be on the show though. And the little discomfort, I can sleep after, I think. Yeah, I know they got plans for tomorrow's show, this show. Damn it, that's not true. That's not true. That's not true. By the way, next week, shit, I got to get one guest for tomorrow. Yeah, I got to get one guest for tomorrow and a guest for Saturday. But next week, I'm going to have Colonel Master Sergeant Dennis Fritz and Colonel Wilkerson. They're going to be on together as a panel. So I'm looking forward to that. That is going to be fantastic. All right, guys, I'm closing this. Tomorrow is going to be Ted, KJ, Andre, and Anissa might for 8 o'clock. And then the show will be booked. So you all have a fantastic day. I will see you bright and early in the morning. Oh, shit, what am I saying? Tonight at 7 p.m., I'm going to be on Sabby's Sab show. Tonight at 7 p.m. ET, Eastern time zone. Eastern time zone. I know it's tomorrow morning. It's tomorrow morning for me, for her, it's Eastern time zone. So if you are around, definitely check Sabby out. I will be there. We had a fantastic show today, by the way. We had over 2,000 people live. That is a high point. I've never had that many people on before. I want to say like, share, and you guys have a fantastic day. I'll see you guys either tonight or tomorrow morning. Signing off.